The forest had no mercy for those who ran. Alara's lungs burned as she stumbled over twisted roots, her physician's bag slapping against her hip with every desperate stride. Behind her, the hunting party's torches flickered through the trees like dying stars, too close. Always too close. They'd found the herbs in her cottage, the illegal morphine she'd used to ease old Thomas's death. The village elders had called it witchcraft, but she knew the real crime. She'd refused to let a man suffer for their god. Now she would burn for kindness. Her foot caught on exposed stone. She crashed forward, palms scraping bark as she caught herself against an oak. Blood welled from her abraded skin, hot and copper-bright in the November air. The scent of pine and rotting leaves filled her nose as she pressed her forehead to the rough trunk, counting her own ragged heartbeats. Thud-thud. Pause. Thud-thud-thud. The irregular rhythm she'd lived with since childhood. The flutter that had kept her from the dancing and courtship other girls enjoyed. The physician in Prague had called it a curiosity. Her mother had called it a weakness. Tonight, it might be her execution song. There. Movement by the old road. Alara pushed off the tree and ran. The forest deepened, moonlight fracturing through skeletal branches. Her breath came in white clouds. The November cold bit through her wool cloak, but sweat traced her spine beneath her ruined dress. She'd left everything behind: her books, her instruments, the small brass microscope her father had given her before the fever took him. All she had now was forward. The ground began to slope downward. She half ran, half slid between ancient trees until the forest abruptly ended at a clearing. Before her loomed a structure that shouldn't exist, a manor house carved from black stone, its windows dark as closed eyes. Gargoyles perched along the roofline, their mouths open in silent screams. No lights burned within. No smoke rose from its chimneys. It looked abandoned. It looked like salvation. Alara's heartbeat stuttered against her ribs as she glanced back. Torchlight bobbed between the trees, perhaps 300 yards distant. The voices had grown clearer, triumphant. They thought they had her cornered. She gathered her skirts and ran for the manor's entrance. The door stood twice her height, carved with symbols she couldn't name in the darkness. She seized the iron ring and pulled, expecting resistance, expecting locked sanctuary. Instead, the door swung inward with a whisper of oiled hinges, revealing a vast entrance hall lit by candles that burned without apparent source. Alara froze on the threshold. The flames cast dancing shadows across marble floors, veined with gold. A grand staircase curved upward into darkness, its banister carved from wood so dark it looked like petrified night. Portraits lined the walls, nobles in archaic dress, their eyes following her movement with painted intensity. The air smelled of old books and something else, something metallic and strange that made her physician's mind catalog possibilities. Iron, copper, blood. Please, she whispered to the empty hall. Anyone. I need. The door behind her slammed shut. Alara spun, her bag falling from nerveless fingers. The candles guttered, and in their dimming light, she saw him. He stood at the base of the staircase, where nothing had been a heartbeat before. Tall, perhaps 6 feet, dressed in black that seemed woven from shadow itself. His face could have been carved by a master sculptor, sharp cheekbones, a mouth both cruel and beautiful, eyes that caught the candlelight and threw it back like a cat's. But it was his stillness that struck her most. He didn't breathe, didn't shift his weight, didn't blink. He simply was, as fixed and eternal as the stone beneath her feet. Interesting, he said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries and the smoothness of silk. I was hunting when I heard your heart. I thought at first it was an injured fawn. The rhythm so irregular. Alara's hand moved instinctively to her chest, covering the treacherous organ that had always betrayed her. But then I listened more closely. He tilted his head, and the gesture held something predatory that made her blood run cold. Your heartbeat is different. Not dying, not wounded, simply unique. Outside, voices rose in anger. Fists pounded against the door. Open up. We know she's in there. Surrender the witch. The man, if he was a man, smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. It seems you've brought hunters to my door, little physician. He'd moved closer without appearing to walk, now standing only 10 feet away. This close, she could see his eyes were amber, like honey held up to firelight. Tell me, are you worth the trouble of harboring? Alara's medical training warred with her instinct to flee. She noted his pallor, the unnatural grace, the way the candlelight seemed to avoid his face, creating shadows where none should exist. Her mind supplied impossible answers, but her heart, her flawed, stuttering, heart recognized truth. "You're not human," she breathed. "No." He studied her with the focus of a scholar examining a rare specimen. "And you're not a witch. I can smell the medicines on you. The herbs and tinctures. A healer, then, fleeing those who fear what they don't understand." The pounding on the door intensified. Wood groaned under the assault. "I won't open that door for them," he continued, his voice dropping to something almost gentle. "But neither will I offer sanctuary without price. My name is Cassian Thorn, and I am the last of my house. This manor has stood for 300 years, and no mortal enters without invitation." He extended one pale hand. "So choose, physician. Will you run back to your pyre, or will you accept the shelter of a monster?" Alara's heart performed its familiar arrhythmic dance as she stared at his offered hand. Behind her, the door began to splinter. Before her, a creature from nightmare and legend waited with infinite patience. She thought of Thomas, dying in agony until she'd eased his pain. She thought of her books, burning in the village square. She thought of all the knowledge she'd never learn, all the lives she'd never save if she died tonight. Alara placed her trembling hand in Cassian Thorn's cold palm. His fingers closed around hers with surprising gentleness. The moment their skin met, the candles blazed bright as daylight, and the pounding at the door ceased. A profound silence fell over the manor, as if the building itself had taken a breath. "Wise choice," Cassian murmured. Then his thumb brushed across her racing pulse point, and his eyes darkened to something hungry and ancient. "Though I wonder if you understand what you've just agreed to." He pulled her closer, until she could feel the absence of warmth from his body, until her irregular heartbeat echoed in the space between them. "Welcome to Thornwood Manor, Alara Grant. You're safe from your hunters now." His smile showed the barest hint of elongated canines. "But I make no promises about being safe from me." The entrance hall had fallen silent as a tomb. Alara stood frozen in Cassian's grip, her hand small and warm against his marble-cold fingers. Outside, the mob had retreated, or perhaps they'd never been there at all. The candles burned steady now, their flames straight as soldiers at attention. She could hear nothing but her own erratic pulse and the whisper of her breath. He released her hand with deliberate slowness, stepping back to create space between them. The absence of his touch left her skin tingling. "They've gone," she said, surprised. Her voice worked. "How? They cannot enter without invitation. None can." Cassian moved toward a side table where a crystal decanter caught the light. His movements held a liquid grace that no human could mimic. "The wards on this place were set long before your grandfather was born. To those outside, the manor appears abandoned, forgotten. They'll remember only that they lost your trail in the forest." Alara's physician's mind struggled to reconcile the impossible. Magic, power. He poured dark liquid into 2 glasses, though his hand hesitated over the second. "There's a difference, though most mortals never live long enough to learn it." She watched him lift one glass to his lips, saw how the liquid caught the light wrong, too viscous, too dark. "Not wine." Her stomach turned as understanding crystallized. "You're a vampire." The word hung in the air between them like a verdict. Cassian lowered the glass, his amber eyes finding hers with unsettling intensity. "Yes, though I find the term reductive. I am Cassian Thorn, Lord of Thornwood, last of House Thorn, keeper of the Northern Covenant, and approximately 347 years old." He set down the glass. "I have not fed from a living human in 2 centuries. I survive on what I can hunt, what I can acquire." The careful pause told her everything about the compromises of his existence. "You should be terrified of me," he continued, his voice dropping to something darker. "You should be running for that door. Invitation or no. Instead, you're cataloging my symptoms like I'm a patient in your examination room." Alara realized she'd been staring at his hands, noting the lack of tremor, the perfect stillness that spoke of either absolute control or the absence of living processes. Heat crept up her neck. "I'm a physician," she said quietly. "Or I was training to be one. Observation is habit. In a woman? Revolutionary." But there was no mockery in his tone, only something that might have been approval. "No wonder they tried to burn you." He gestured toward the staircase. "Come, you'll want to see your accommodations before deciding whether you've chosen prison or sanctuary." Alara bent to retrieve her fallen bag, its familiar weight a comfort against the strangeness. As she straightened, candlelight caught a portrait near the stairs, a woman in 18th century dress, her dark hair piled in elaborate curls, her eyes the same amber as Cassian's. "My sister," he said, following her gaze. "Margaret, She died in 1702, 3 years after I was turned. The grief in his voice was fresh as yesterday's wound, despite the centuries. Alara touched her own heart, feeling its irregular flutter. I'm sorry. She lived a full life. Married, had children, died at 73, surrounded by grandchildren, who never knew what her brother had become. He started up the stairs without checking if she followed. That was the last time I attended a funeral in daylight. The last time I was welcomed in a church. The last time I was human. Alara climbed after him, her hand trailing along the banister. The wood felt warm beneath her palm, as if the manor itself lived. At the landing, a long corridor stretched into shadow, lined with closed doors. Cassian led her to the third door on the right. This was Margaret's room, he said, producing an iron key from nowhere. No one has occupied it since. It faces east, so you'll have morning sun. There's a lock on the inside. The implication was clear. I will not enter without permission. The door swung open to reveal a chamber that stole her breath. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, its emerald curtains embroidered with gold thread. A writing desk sat beneath tall windows, their heavy drapes drawn against the night. Shelves lined one wall, crammed with leather-bound volumes. A fireplace held fresh wood, waiting to be lit. It was more beautiful than any room she'd ever inhabited. There are clothes in the wardrobe, Cassian continued, standing carefully at the threshold. They're dated, but clean. Feminine things that Margaret left behind. You're near her height. His eyes traced Alara's frame with clinical assessment. Perhaps slightly taller. You'll find washing water in the basin, though I'm afraid the plumbing is archaic. Alara stepped inside, her boots sinking into a carpet soft as moss. The scent of lavender drifted from sachets tucked among the bedding. Someone, Cassian, she realized, had preserved this space with devotion. Why? She asked, turning to face him. Why help me? He remained outside the room, his expression unreadable. Because your heartbeat is different. Because I was hunting rabbits in the eastern wood when I heard it, and I thought... He stopped himself, jaw tightening. I thought something was dying nearby, something young and wounded. When I found you instead, running from ignorance and fear. His hand gripped the doorframe, and she saw for the first time how his control cost him. The white-knuckled tension, the way he wouldn't meet her eyes. I remember what it feels like to be hunted, he finished quietly. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Rain began to tap against the windows, gentle at first, then building to a steady percussion. The temperature had dropped. Alara could see her breath now. Without thinking, she moved to the fireplace, kneeling to arrange kindling as her father had taught her. Allow me. Cassian crossed the threshold so quickly, she barely saw him move. He crouched beside her, and she noticed for the first time the dark veins visible at his wrists, the way his skin seemed stretched too tight over elegant bones. He snapped his fingers, and flame erupted from the kindling without need for flint or tinder. Alara jerked back. How? Old magic. Blood magic. The kind that costs more than it gives. He stood abruptly, putting distance between them. I should go. You need rest. We'll speak more in the morning, after you've had time to think clearly. Wait. She rose, brushing ash from her skirts. What happens now? Can I leave? Not immediately. The village will be watching the roads for days yet. His expression darkened. But you're not a prisoner, Alara Grant. When it's safe, if you wish to go, I'll provide you with everything you need. Money, documents, safe passage to the nearest city. And if I stay? The question surprised them both. Cassian studied her with those ancient eyes, and she saw hunger there, carefully leashed. Not just for blood, she realized. For conversation, for companionship, for something living in his eternal tomb. If you stay, he said slowly, then we'll need to establish rules. I keep mortal hours as much as my nature allows, but I cannot bear sunlight. I hunt at night, always away from human settlements. I have, intel David, needs that must be met, but never at your expense. You would have freedom of the manor and grounds, access to my library, my protection from any who would harm you. In exchange for what? Nothing. He moved toward the door, then paused. Perhaps company. I have not spoken to another soul in 3 years. The isolation grows heavy. Alara watched him retreat into the corridor's shadows. This creature who had saved her, who guarded his dead sister's room like a shrine, who hunted rabbits rather than humans. Every medical text she'd ever read screamed that he was impossible. Every fairy tale warned she was in terrible danger, but her heart, her strange, flawed heart, recognized something in him. "Cassian?" He turned, framed by candlelight. "Thank you," she said simply. "For listening. For hearing me when others heard only burning." Something cracked in his careful mask. He nodded once, sharp and quick, then vanished into the darkness with inhuman speed. Alara closed the door and slid the bolt home. The lock clicked with satisfying finality. Alone at last, she sank onto the edge of Margaret's bed and pressed both hands to her chest, feeling her treacherous heart stutter and race. Thud, thud, pause, thud, thud, thud. Different, he'd called it. Not broken, not dying, simply unique. She looked around the room at the books, the clothes, the life preserved like an insect in amber, and wondered what price Cassian Thorne had paid for his immortality. What he was still paying, alone in this manner, hunting rabbits and drinking stored blood, and clinging to his sister's memory like a lifeline. Outside, rain hammered the windows. Inside, the fire crackled its warm promise. Alara pulled off her muddy boots and began to undress, her mind already cataloging questions. How did his physiology work? What sustained him? Why had he been able to cross into sunlight once? And what had changed? Could his condition be studied? She caught herself and laughed, the sound strange in the quiet room. Even in a vampire's manner, fleeing execution, she was still a physician at heart. She just hoped that heart would keep beating long enough to find the answers. Dawn crept through the heavy curtains in pale fingers of light. Alara woke slowly, her body aching from yesterday's flight. For a moment, confusion clouded her mind. The bed too soft, the ceiling too high, the scent of lavender too strong. Then memory returned in a rush. The mob, the forest, the impossible man who'd offered sanctuary. She sat up, her heart performing its familiar arrhythmic waltz. The fire had burned to embers overnight, leaving the room cool but not cold. Someone, Cassian, it had to be, had left a tray on the writing desk. Bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a pot of tea still faintly steaming. He'd been in the room while she slept. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, Alara found herself studying the tray's placement, the careful distance maintained from the bed, the way the food was arranged with almost fussy precision. A vampire who knocked. Who kept promises. Who left breakfast with the reverence of a religious offering. She rose and dressed in one of Margaret's gowns, a simple day dress in deep burgundy that fit surprisingly well. The mirror above the wash basin showed her reflection. Tangled chestnut hair, circles under her gray eyes, skin still flushed from sleep. Human and alive, and utterly out of place in this manner of preserved memory. The tea was perfect, strong, hot, sweetened with honey. As she ate, Alara's eyes drifted to the bookshelves. Medical texts, poetry, philosophical treatises, all dating from the early 1700s. Margaret's collection. She pulled down a volume on herbalism, noting the careful annotations in the margins, a woman's handwriting that spoke of curiosity and intelligence. A knock at the door made her start. "Miss Grant, are you awake?" Cassian's voice, carefully modulated to human volume. Alara set down the book. "I am. You may enter." The door opened, and she understood immediately why he'd needed permission. Morning light streamed through the windows behind her, dividing the room into zones of gold and shadow. Cassian remained in the doorway, just beyond the sun's reach, dressed in the same black from last night. He looked tired, if such a thing were possible for the undead shadows under his eyes, a tension in his shoulders. "I trust you slept well?" Formality coated his words like frost on glass. "Better than I expected." Alara moved away from the window, creating a path of shadow. "Thank you for the breakfast, and for not eating me." A ghost of amusement crossed his face. "I told you, I don't feed from the living." He stepped fully into the room, his movements careful as a dancer navigating glass. "I thought you might appreciate a tour of the manor today, particularly the library. I noticed you reading Margaret's books. I hope that's not presumptuous. Margaret would have liked you." He said it with certainty, and grief flickered across his features like distant lightning. She was fascinated by medicine. Used to trap me in conversations about humors and bloodletting, theories I found barbaric even then. Alara bristled despite herself. "Modern medicine has advanced significantly since 1699? I should hope so." His smile held genuine warmth. "I've kept up with developments as best I can. Journals, books, smuggled in from cities, Pasteur's germ theory. Lister's antiseptics, the discovery of anesthesia. I find it all rather miraculous. She stared at him. You study medicine? I study everything. When you have eternity, stagnation becomes the greatest danger. He gestured toward the door. Come. Let me show you why I've survived 3 centuries without losing my mind entirely. The corridor outside was even more impressive by daylight. Paintings lined the walls, landscapes, portraits, still lifes, each one a masterwork. Alara recognized styles from different eras, the evolution of artistic movements captured in oil and canvas. Did you paint these? Some. Others were acquired. He led her down the grand staircase, past more portraits of people who'd died centuries ago. I was terrible at first. It took me 50 years to develop any real skill. Immortality is humbling that way. You can't hide behind lack of time anymore. They turned left at the base of the stairs, entering a wing Alara hadn't seen last night. The manor revealed itself in layers. A music room with a dust-covered pianoforte, a conservatory where dead plants stood like skeletal reminders, a dining hall with a table that could seat 30, all empty, all silent. How long have you been alone? She asked quietly. Cassian's stride faltered. 3 years since the last servant left. She was 83, and I'd employed her family for 3 generations. Before that, I had companions occasionally, other vampires passing through, mortal guests who needed shelter. But House Thorn has been dying for 2 centuries. I'm the last. He stopped before a set of double doors carved with intricate symbols. His hand rested on the handle, and for a moment, he seemed almost nervous. This is my sanctuary, Alara Grant. I'm trusting you with it. The doors swung open, and she forgot to breathe. The library was a cathedral of knowledge. 3 stories of shelves rose toward a domed ceiling painted with celestial maps. Spiral staircases connected the levels, iron rails gleaming in light that poured through stained glass windows. Books, thousands of them, crammed every shelf. Scrolls filled special compartments. Manuscripts lay carefully preserved under glass. The scent of old leather and paper hung thick as incense. My God, Alara whispered. I started collecting after Margaret died. Cassian moved into the space with visible relaxation, as if crossing into holy ground. I needed something. Purpose beyond mere survival. So I decided to preserve what I could. Knowledge, history, art, things that would otherwise be lost. He led her to a section labeled Medical Sciences, and Alara's fingers trembled as they traced spines. Vesalius's anatomy, Harvey's circulation, recent texts on surgery and pharmacology, books she'd only heard of, had never dreamed of touching. You have Gray's Anatomy, she breathed, pulling down the volume. First edition. I have the original manuscript for several chapters. Gray and I corresponded briefly before his death. Cassian watched her reaction with something like hunger. You may read anything you wish, study anything. I only ask that you handle them carefully. Alara looked up from the book, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not a monster, not a myth. A scholar trapped in a predator's body, collecting knowledge like armor against the emptiness of eternity. Why medicine? She asked. Of all things to focus on? His expression shuddered. Because I remember what it felt like to be sick, to be dying, to feel my heart slow, and my lungs fill with fluid while my family prayed, and physicians prescribed useless remedies. He turned away, examining a shelf with false interest. I was 23 when the fever came. Cholera, probably, though they called it God's judgment. Margaret nursed me for 3 days before our parents sent her away. They didn't want her infected. But you survived. No. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. I died. And then he came, the vampire who'd been stalking our village. He found me in the plague house, not quite gone, and he offered a choice. Die as planned, or live forever as something else. Alara moved closer, careful not to touch him. You chose life. I chose cowardice. Bitterness edged his words. I was afraid of the dark, the cold, the nothing that waited. So I drank his blood and became what you see now. By the time I understood the cost, Margaret was already mourning my death. He finally met her eyes, and she saw the weight he carried. 3 centuries of isolation, of watching mortals live and die, of being forever separate from the world he could no longer touch. I revealed myself to her once, 5 years after my turning. I thought she'd understand, that she'd forgive me. His laugh was hollow. She screamed, called me a devil wearing her brother's face. I had to compel her to forget, to believe I was really dead. I watched her from the shadows after that, making sure she was safe, happy. She never knew I was there. The confession hung between them, raw and bleeding. That's why you keep her room preserved, Alara said softly. Why you study medicine. You're trying to understand what you lost. Cassian's jaw tightened. I'm trying to understand what I became. If there's a cure, a reversal, some way to undo this curse. He gestured at the library. Somewhere in these books, there might be an answer. I've been searching for 200 years. Rain began to fall outside, tapping against the stained glass. The light shifted, painting colored shadows across Cassian's pale face. He looked ancient in that moment, and terribly young, and infinitely weary. Alara's heart stuttered in her chest, and she placed one hand over it instinctively. Cassian's eyes tracked the movement. Your heart, he said. It's been irregular since birth? Yes. The physicians say it's a malformation of the valves. That I'm lucky to have survived childhood. She smiled without humor. They also said I shouldn't run, shouldn't exert myself, shouldn't expect a normal life. I became a physician to prove them wrong. And yet you ran from that mob for miles. Fear is excellent motivation. His expression softened. You're not afraid now. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. No, I don't think I am. Thunder rumbled overhead. The library's shadows deepened, and Cassian stepped closer, until she could count the dark veins beneath his translucent skin, until she could see her own reflection in his amber eyes. You should be, he murmured. I heard your heartbeat from a quarter mile away. I can smell your blood even now. The oxygen-rich arterial flow versus the darker venous return. I know you haven't eaten enough today because your pulse is slightly tachycardic, compensating for low blood sugar. He reached out slowly, giving her time to retreat. When she didn't, his cold fingers touched her wrist, finding her pulse point. And your heart. His eyes closed. It sounds like music, imperfect, arrhythmic, but somehow more beautiful for its flaws. It makes me remember what it felt like to be alive. Alara stood frozen, her breath shallow, feeling the coolness of his touch against her racing pulse. Is that why you saved me? Because of my heart? I saved you because you deserve to live. His eyes opened, intense and honest. But yes. Your heartbeat called to me. It still does. He released her wrist and stepped back, his control reasserting itself like a door slamming shut. I should warn you, other vampires may hear it too, may be drawn to it the way I was. This arrhythmia makes you distinctive. Is that a threat? A promise. His voice hardened. I haven't maintained House Thorne's neutrality for 3 centuries by being weak. Anyone who comes for you will answer to me. The declaration should have sounded like possession, like a predator claiming prey. Instead, it carried the weight of absolute certainty, of vows written in blood and stone. Alara found herself stepping toward him instead of away. Teach me, she said impulsively. About vampires, about your world, about the rules you live by. If I'm going to stay here, even temporarily, I need to understand what I'm facing. Cassian regarded her for a long moment. Are you certain? Some knowledge can't be unlearned. I'm a physician. Knowledge is what I do. A real smile broke across his face, transforming him from beautiful to devastating. Very well, Miss Grant. Consider yourself enrolled in the most unusual medical education in history. He offered his hand, cold and steady. Welcome to the archives of night. Try not to lose yourself in the darkness. Alara took his hand, feeling the absence of warmth, the marble smoothness of his skin. Her irregular heart stuttered once, twice, then steadied into its familiar imperfect rhythm. As thunder crashed outside and rain lashed the windows, she thought, this is insane. I'm learning medicine from a vampire. I'm trusting a predator. I'm not afraid when I should be terrified. But she didn't let go of his hand, and neither did he. 3 days passed like pages turning in an ancient book. Alara fell into a rhythm at Thornwood Manor. Her mornings spent in Margaret's room studying medical texts, her afternoons in the library discovering the vast catalog of Cassian's collection. He was a patient teacher, appearing each evening as twilight softened the manor's edges, bringing questions that forced her to think beyond the limitations of her previous training. Explain the pathology of consumption, he'd say, settling into the leather chair opposite hers in the library. Or, if a patient presents with jaundice and fever, what diagnostic steps would you take? He listened to her answers with absolute focus, occasionally offering insights from cases he'd witnessed across centuries. His knowledge was practical, observational, gathered from the edges of human suffering he'd watched but could not cure. On the third evening, as rain drummed against the library's windows, Cassian arrived carrying a leather-bound journal. His expression was troubled. The careful mask he usually wore cracked at the edges. "I want to show you something," he said without preamble. "But I need your word that you'll approach it scientifically, not emotionally." Alara set down her tea. "You have it." He handed her the journal, his fingers careful not to touch hers. The leather was soft with age, the pages yellowed but meticulously maintained. She opened it and found anatomical drawings detailed, precise sketches of a human body, but the notes beside them made her blood run cold. Day 1. Subject consent, given. Puncture wounds clean. Minimal trauma. Blood loss approximately 500 milliliters. Subject reports mild euphoria, no pain. Day 7. Second feeding. Subject requests continuation of arrangement. Healing accelerated, no scarring present. Day 30. Subject appears healthier than before arrangement began. Weight increased, color improved, chronic cough resolved. You experimented on people. Alara's voice came out flat. With their full consent and generous compensation. Cassian's posture was rigid, defensive. This was 1803. I was trying to understand what I'd become, what my bite did to humans beyond simple blood loss. I needed to know if I was poison or cure. She turned the page, finding more notes, more drawings, theories about the properties of vampire saliva, its anticoagulant and healing properties, observations about subjects' increased vitality after regular, controlled feedings. I discovered that vampire saliva contains compounds that accelerate healing, boost immune response, even extend lifespan if exposure is regular and moderate. His voice carried the weight of scientific discovery and moral uncertainty, but it also creates dependence. The subjects began craving the bite, the euphoria it produced. 3 of them begged me to turn them. Did you? No. The word was absolute. Immortality isn't a gift, Alara. It's a sentence. I wouldn't inflict this existence on anyone, no matter how much they begged. She studied his face, the exhaustion there, the isolation that had carved lines, even time couldn't erase. But you continued experimenting. For 50 years, until I understood enough to control my nature, to predict my needs, to live without creating victims. He gestured at the journal. That's why I survive on animal blood now. It sustains me, barely, but it doesn't create the dependence that human blood does, doesn't forge the bond. Cassian hesitated, then rose and moved to the window. Rain streaked the glass, distorting the world beyond. When a vampire feeds from a willing human repeatedly, it creates a connection. The vampire can sense the human's emotions, location, physical state, and the human becomes. He searched for words. Addicted isn't quite right. Devoted. They would do anything for another bite. Another moment of that euphoria. That's why you've been so careful, Alara realized. Why you won't even touch me unnecessarily. You're afraid of creating that bond. I'm terrified of it. He turned back to face her, his amber eyes bright in the lamplight. I've seen what happens when vampires exploit that bond. They create thralls humans who are little more than addicts and puppets. I swore after Margaret's death that I would never do that to anyone. Thunder cracked overhead, and the library's lights flickered. Cassian tensed, his head tilting as if listening to something beyond human perception. Someone's on the grounds, he said quietly. Another vampire. And they're heading for the manor. Alara's heart stuttered. Is it? Wait here. He vanished before she could finish, moving with inhuman speed that left only disturbed air in his wake. But Alara had never been good at following orders. She grabbed a candelabra from the library desk and followed the path she'd seen Cassian take, down the corridor toward the entrance hall. Voices drifted up the stairs, 2 of them. One she recognized and one she didn't. Haven't seen you in 50 years, Cassian. I thought you'd finally turned to ash. The stranger's voice was female, rich with amusement and something darker. Alara crept to the landing where she could peer down through the banister rails without being seen. A woman stood in the entrance hall, shaking rain from her cloak. She was beautiful in the way predators are beautiful, all sharp lines and dangerous curves, with black hair that fell in waves to her waist. Her eyes were the same amber as Cassian's, marking her kind. Vivienne. Cassian stood between the woman and the stairs, his posture protective. What brings you to Thornwood? Can't an old friend visit? Vivienne smiled, showing too many teeth. I was passing through the region and heard interesting rumors. A physician fleeing witch hunters. A vampire who offered sanctuary. Tell me, Cassian, have you finally taken a mortal companion after all these years of righteous isolation? My affairs are none of your concern. Oh, but they are. Vivienne circled him slowly, her movements liquid and predatory. You know the Northern Covenant's rules. Any vampire harboring a mortal must register them, ensure they're not being held against their will, demonstrate that no thrall bond is being formed. Alara is my guest, not my thrall. Alara. Vivienne tasted the name like wine. Such a pretty name. I'd love to meet her. To verify her well-being. Cassian's hands clenched. You will not go near her. Territorial already? You work fast. Vivienne's laugh was cruel. Or perhaps it's that unusual heartbeat I heard from the road. Arrhythmic, distinctive, the kind of thing that would call to a lonely vampire like a siren song. Have you fed from her yet, Cassian? Or are you still playing the noble monster? Alara's hand tightened on the candelabra. Her heart hammered its irregular rhythm, suddenly feeling like betrayal. I haven't touched her, Cassian said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. And you won't either. She's under House Thorne's protection. Protection. How quaint. Vivienne stopped circling, her attention sharp as a blade. But protection requires strength, old friend. And you're weak, I can smell it. When was the last time you fed on anything more substantial than rabbits? Cassian didn't answer. That's what I thought. Vivienne moved closer, until they stood mere inches apart. You're starving yourself into weakness, clinging to your precious morals while the world moves on without you. Meanwhile, I could hear that girl's heart from a quarter-mile away. Do you know what she'd be worth on the black market? Humans with unique blood, with distinctive traits. Collectors pay fortunes for them. Get out. Cassian's voice was pure authority, the weight of 3 centuries behind it. Now, or what? You'll fight me? Vivienne's smile turned vicious. You're not strong enough, Cassian. Not anymore. And when word spreads about your unusual guest, others will come. Vampires who aren't bound by your outdated sense of honor. She turned toward the door, then paused. I'll give you 3 days. Either register her with the Covenant properly, or I'll be back with witnesses to ensure you're not breaking the laws we all agreed to follow. Vivienne, 3 days. Then that girl becomes everyone's business. She vanished into the night, leaving only the echo of rain and the heavy silence of threat. Cassian stood motionless in the empty hall, his shoulders rigid with tension. After a moment, he spoke without turning. You can come down now, Alara. I know you're there. She descended slowly, the candelabra still gripped in her hand like a weapon. Cassian watched her approach, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry you heard that, he said quietly. Is it true? About the black market? The collectors? Yes. No hesitation, no comfort. Humans with rare blood types, unusual physiological traits, even just exceptional beauty vampires trade them like commodities. The Northern Covenant outlawed the practice a century ago, but enforcement is limited. Alara thought of her distinctive heartbeat, the thing that had always made her different, now marking her as prey. And this covenant? What does registration mean? It means I would formally declare you under my protection, which would prevent most vampires from touching you. He finally met her eyes. But it also means submitting to regular inspections, proving that I'm not creating a thrall bond, demonstrating that you're here voluntarily and mentally sound. And if I wanted to leave, then you could. The Covenant protects mortal agency above all else. His jaw tightened. But Alara, if you leave now, unprotected, other vampires will hunt you. Your heartbeat is too distinctive. Vivienne alone wouldn't risk the Covenant's wrath, but she has allies who would. The trap closed around her with perfect clarity. Stay and risk being bound to Cassian. Leave and be hunted by creatures she couldn't fight. What do you want me to do? She asked. I want you to be safe. The simple honesty in his voice made her chest ache. But I won't force your choice. If you want to leave, I'll take you to a city, set you up with a new identity, give you everything you need to disappear. It won't guarantee your safety, but it would give you a chance. Or I stay, and you register me. Yes. Alara looked around the entrance hall at the portraits of the dead, the candles that burned without source, the beautiful prison that had become an accidental sanctuary. Her heart performed its familiar arrhythmic dance, the sound that had drawn predators and saviors in equal measure. If I stay, she said slowly, I want to continue my medical education. I want full access to your library, your journals, your research, and I want the truth about what you are, what you need, no more secrets. Cassian moved closer, stopping just outside the range where she'd have to tilt her head to meet his eyes. Agreed. But in return, I need your absolute honesty. If you feel the bond beginning, if my presence starts to affect you in ways that feel unnatural, you have to tell me immediately. How will I know? You'll crave my company, my touch. The bond makes mortals feel safe, happy, almost euphoric around the vampire. His voice dropped. It's insidious because it mimics real affection. You have to trust yourself enough to know the difference. Alara thought of the past 3 days. The easy conversations, the way she'd started to anticipate his evening arrivals. Was that natural curiosity, or the beginning of something more dangerous? I'll tell you, she promised. The moment I'm not certain. Good. He extended his hand, formal as a contract. Then let's register you properly. Tomorrow night, I'll take you to the Covenant's representative. It will be uncomfortable. They'll ask invasive questions, test your mental state, verify your story. But once it's done, you'll have legal protection. Alara placed her hand in his, feeling the cold marble of his skin, the absolute steadiness of something that didn't need to breathe or pulse, or live in any way she understood. One more question, she said. Anything. Vivienne said you were weak. Is that true? Cassian's grip on her hand tightened fractionally. Animal blood sustains me, but it doesn't make me strong. Human blood is richer, more potent. A vampire who feeds regularly from humans is faster, stronger, heals quicker. He released her hand. But I won't compromise my principles, even for power. What if there was another way? The idea had been forming in her physician's mind since she'd read his journal. What if you could feed without creating the bond, without harming anyone? It's not possible. The euphoria, the connection, they're part of the vampire's saliva, built into the bite itself. But what if consent was truly informed? What if the donor understood the risks, the biological mechanism, and still chose to help? Alara met his stunned expression. What if I volunteered? The air between them crystallized into something electric and terrifying. No, Cassian's voice was iron. Absolutely not. Why? Because you're afraid of hurting me? Or because you're afraid of what you might feel? Both. The admission seemed torn from him. Alara, you don't understand what you're offering. The moment I bite you, everything changes. Your blood would be in my system, your heartbeat in my head. I'd know your emotions, your location, your every physical response. That's not protection, it's invasion. Or partnership. She held his gaze, refusing to look away. You said yourself that regular, controlled feeding created health benefits. What if we approached this scientifically? What if we documented everything, maintained strict boundaries, treated it as research rather than feeding? You're serious. I'm a physician offering a patient a potential treatment. She smiled slightly. And you're a scholar who's been starving himself for 200 years rather than risk harming someone. Maybe it's time to try a different approach. Cassian stared at her for a long moment, conflict warring across his features. Finally, he shook his head. Ask me again in 3 days, he said quietly. After the registration, after you've had time to think clearly without the pressure of Vivienne's threats. If you still want to do this, if you're absolutely certain, we'll discuss it then. We'll discuss it then, he agreed. But as he turned away, she saw his hand tremble just once, just barely before he clenched it into a fist. And Alara knew that he wanted to say yes, that he was terrified of how much he wanted it. Outside, the storm intensified. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the manor in stark white flashes. And somewhere in the darkness beyond Thornwood's wards, Vivienne smiled. Her report to the Covenant already forming. The game had changed. The stakes had risen. And neither Alara nor Cassian fully understood how much danger they were walking into. The carriage moved through the night like a ghost through fog. Alara sat across from Cassian, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. They'd been traveling for an hour, the horses moving at an unnatural pace that suggested Cassian's influence extended beyond the manor's walls. Outside the windows, forest gave way to rolling hills, then to the outskirts of a town she didn't recognize. The Covenant meets in different locations, Cassian explained, noting her observation. We're heading to a neutral house, owned by a vampire old enough to remember when these lands had different names. How old? 800 years, give or take. His tone was conversational, but tension radiated from his too still posture. His name is Aldrich, and he's served as regional arbiter for 3 centuries. He's fair, by vampire standards, but he's also pragmatic. He won't hesitate to rule against me if he thinks I'm violating covenant law. Alara adjusted the borrowed cloak, another of Margaret's, smelling faintly of lavender and thyme. And Vivienne? Will she be there? Likely. She's the one who invoked the inspection. His jaw tightened. She'll push for the maximum scrutiny, try to find any excuse to claim I'm creating a thrall bond. We need to be careful, Alara. They'll try to separate us, question you alone, test your reactions to my presence. What kind of tests? Psychological assessment, mostly. They'll ask about your feelings toward me, your motivations for staying, whether you experience euphoria or compulsion in my presence. He finally met her eyes. They're trying to determine if you have free will, or if my bite has compromised your judgment. But you haven't bitten me. They don't know that. His smile was grim. And if Vivienne suspects you've offered yourself as a donor, she'll use that against us. She'll claim I've manipulated you into compliance. The carriage slowed, turning onto a private drive lined with ancient oaks. Through the trees, Alara glimpsed a manor house that made Thornwood look modest by comparison. 3 stories of pale stone, windows blazing with light, gargoyles perched along every roofline like sentinels. "Stay close to me," Cassian murmured as the carriage stopped. "Answer their questions honestly, but don't volunteer information. And whatever happens, remember you're under House Thorn's protection. They can't touch you without violating laws older than Christianity." The door opened, and a figure stood waiting. Tall, silver-haired, dressed in clothes that managed to be both medieval and timeless. His eyes glowed amber in the lamplight, and when he smiled, Alara saw fangs that put Cassian's to shame. "Cassian Thorn," the vampire said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "It's been too long, and this must be the physician with the unusual heart. Aldrich." Cassian descended first, then offered Alara his hand. She took it, grateful for the cold steadiness, as her own pulse stuttered. "Thank you for seeing us on such short notice. When Vivienne petitions for an emergency inspection, I take it seriously." Aldrich's gaze moved to Alara, assessing. "Miss Grant, I presume? Welcome to Greystone House. I hope this evening will be more pleasant than you fear." He led them inside, through an entrance hall that made her think of palaces and power. Other vampires watched from doorways and balconies, some curious, some hostile, all predatory. Alara pressed closer to Cassian instinctively, feeling his hand tighten on hers. They entered a formal chamber where Vivienne waited, flanked by 2 other vampires Alara didn't recognize. A long table dominated the space, lit by hundreds of candles. Aldrich took his seat at the head, gesturing for Cassian and Alara to sit opposite Vivienne. "Let us begin," Aldrich said. "Vivienne Blackwater has petitioned for formal inspection of Cassian Thorn's harboring of the mortal Alara Grant. The charges are possible thrall bond formation, unlawful containment, and failure to register a vulnerable human in vampire territory." "I've broken no laws," Cassian said evenly. "Then you won't object to our questions." Vivienne's smile was sharp. "Miss Grant, how long have you been residing at Thornwood Manor?" 4 days. "And did Lord Thorn invite you, or did you intrude upon his property?" "I sought sanctuary from persecution. He granted it." "How charitable." Vivienne's tone dripped poison. "Tell me, in those 4 days, has Lord Thorn fed from you?" Alara met her amber eyes steadily. "No." "Has he touched your blood in any way? Tasted it, tested it, examined it?" "No." "Have you offered him your blood?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Alara felt Cassian tense beside her, felt the weight of every vampire's attention focusing on her answer. "I have," she said calmly. He refused. Murmurs rippled through the assembled vampires. Vivienne leaned forward, triumph glittering in her eyes. "And why would you offer something so intimate to a vampire you'd known for mere days?" "Because I'm a physician, and he's been starving himself for centuries rather than risk harming anyone. I saw an opportunity for mutually beneficial research." "Research?" Vivienne laughed. "How clinical. Tell me, Miss Grant, when you look at Lord Thorn, what do you feel?" The test. This was the test Cassian had warned her about. Alara took a slow breath, organizing her thoughts with the precision of medical diagnosis. "I feel curiosity, respect for his knowledge, gratitude for his protection, wariness of his nature." She paused. "And pity for his isolation. Not attraction, not desire, not the euphoric comfort that comes from thrall bond formation?" "I'm attracted to knowledge, Miss Blackwater. Lord Thorn possesses 3 centuries of it. If that creates desire, it's for learning, not for his person. The answer was calculated to be both true and clinical. Alara didn't mention the way her heart raced when Cassian entered a room, or how she'd begun to listen for his footsteps. Those reactions could be natural, or they could be the bond beginning. She wasn't certain yet. Aldrich studied her for a long moment. "Miss Grant, I'm going to ask Lord Thorn to leave the room. I need to assess your mental state in his absence. If you're under any form of compulsion, it should ease when he's not present." "That's acceptable," Cassian said, though his posture screamed reluctance. "No touching her," he added, his voice dropping to command. "No feeding, no testing, no physical contact of any kind." "Agreed." Aldrich nodded to the door. "Please wait in the antechamber. This won't take long." Cassian rose slowly, his eyes meeting Alara's. She saw the question there. "Will you be all right?" She nodded once, firm. He left, and the room's atmosphere shifted immediately. The vampires closed in slightly, their predatory nature no longer tempered by Cassian's protective presence. Alara forced herself to breathe evenly, to keep her heartbeat as steady as her faulty rhythm allowed. Aldrich stood and circled the table, stopping behind her chair. "Miss Grant, I'm going to place my hand on your shoulder. This will allow me to sense if any vampire magic is influencing your thoughts. Do you consent?" "Yes." His hand settled on her shoulder, cold, heavy, ancient. Alara felt a strange pressure in her mind, like fingers pushing gently against her consciousness. Not painful, but invasive. Searching. After a moment, he withdrew. "No compulsion, no thrall bond. Her mind is entirely her own." Vivienne's expression soured. "That's impossible. I heard her heartbeat. It's been drawing vampires from miles away." "Cassian must have what?" Aldrich's voice sharpened. "Protected a vulnerable human, as is his right under covenant law, resisted feeding despite provocation. By all accounts, Vivienne, Lord Thorn, has behaved with exemplary restraint, but the bond is not present. I would sense it." Aldrich returned to his seat. "Miss Grant, you're free to leave Thornwood whenever you choose. Do you wish to leave?" Alara considered the question seriously. She thought of the library, the research, the possibility of understanding Cassian's condition. She thought of the village that had tried to burn her, the world outside that would never let a woman practice medicine freely. And she thought of Cassian himself, isolated, brilliant, clinging to his humanity, despite everything that tried to strip it away. "No," she said quietly. "I wish to stay, at least until I've completed my medical education. Lord Thorn has offered me access to resources I could never access elsewhere, and when your education is complete, then I'll decide where to go next. But it will be my choice." Aldrich nodded slowly. "Very well. Lord Thorn will be required to submit monthly reports on your well-being. If at any point you wish to leave, send word to me directly. I'll ensure safe passage anywhere you wish to go." He gestured, and Cassian was allowed back in. The relief on his face was carefully masked, but Alara saw it in the way his shoulders dropped fractionally. "The inspection is complete," Aldrich announced. "Miss Grant shows no signs of compulsion or thrall bond. She is staying at Thornwood of her own free will, with full understanding of Lord Thorn's nature. House Thorn's protection is recognized and registered." "This is a mistake," Vivienne said, rising. "That girl's heartbeat will draw every vampire in the region. Cassian can't protect her forever. Then perhaps others should exercise the same restraint Lord Thorn has shown." Aldrich's tone brooked no argument. "This hearing is concluded. Miss Grant is under formal covenant protection. Any vampire who harms her will answer to me personally." The pronouncement carried the weight of absolute law. Vivienne's eyes blazed with fury, but she bowed stiffly and swept from the room, her companions following. Aldrich turned to Cassian. "A word of advice, old friend. Strengthen yourself. Animal blood won't sustain you if you need to defend her against a real threat." "I know." Cassian's voice was tight. "Then do something about it. This girl has a rare mind, sharp, curious, unafraid. It would be a waste to let her die because you're too noble to accept help." The Arbiter's gaze moved to Alara. "And you, Miss Grant. Be careful what you offer. Vampires are excellent at convincing themselves that taking is the same as receiving." With that cryptic warning, he dismissed them. The carriage ride back to Thornwood was silent. Alara watched Cassian's profile in the darkness, seeing the tension that had settled into his bones. When they finally pulled up to the manor, he helped her down and immediately put distance between them. "I need to hunt," he said abruptly. "I'll be gone for several hours. Don't wait up." He vanished into the forest before she could respond. Elara stood alone in the courtyard, the wind picking up around her, carrying the scent of coming rain. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her irregular heartbeat, the thing that had drawn predators and protectors, that had marked her as different since birth. And she made her decision. When Cassian returned hours later, exhausted and still hungry, he found her waiting in the library. She'd pulled down his experimental journals, his notes on feeding and consent, and the biological mechanisms of the bond. "I haven't changed my mind," she said without preamble. "I still want to help, but on my terms, with scientific rigor and clear boundaries." Cassian stood in the doorway, his amber eyes bright with hunger and fear, and something that might have been hope. "Tell me your terms," he said quietly. And Elara began to outline the most dangerous medical experiment either of them had ever attempted. They established the terms over 3 nights. Cassian insisted on protocols, safeguards, fail-safes, that would protect Elara from both the physical and psychological effects of his bite. She countered with scientific rigor, demanding he document everything: his strength levels, his reaction times, the exact composition of his saliva before and after feeding. They worked in the library, papers spread across the table between them like a battlefield of scholarship and fear. "First feeding will be minimal," Cassian said, his pen scratching across parchment. "No more than 100 milliliters. We'll monitor your recovery time, your emotional state, any signs of bond formation. And your condition?" Elara added her own notes. "Strength, speed, healing ability. We need quantifiable measurements. I can test myself against previous baselines. I've kept records." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "But Elara, once we begin this, there's no guarantee we can stop. If the bond forms despite precautions, then we'll document that too." She set down her pen. "Cassian, I know the risks. I've read every journal, every case study you've compiled. But I also know you're weakening yourself for an ideal that might not be sustainable. What happens when something threatens this manner? When Vivian returns with allies, and you're too weak to defend either of us? I'd die first. That's not a solution. That's suicide." She leaned forward, forcing him to look at her. "You taught me that medicine requires difficult choices. Sometimes the treatment is uncomfortable. Sometimes it comes with risks. But doing nothing is also a choice. And right now, doing nothing makes us both vulnerable." His jaw worked. "You're asking me to compromise everything I've stood for. I'm asking you to trust me, to trust that I'm informed enough to consent, strong enough to maintain my agency, and intelligent enough to recognize if the bond begins to form." She softened her voice. "You've spent 200 years protecting everyone else. Let someone protect you for once." The silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackling fire and the whisper of rain against windows. Finally, Cassian nodded. 3 days from now. That gives you time to change your mind, and me time to prepare." "Prepare how?" "Fast. The hungrier I am, the more potent the bite, the stronger the risk of bond formation. If I'm well-fed going in, I'll have more control." His expression twisted with self-loathing. "I'll hunt. Larger game deer, maybe a bear if I can find one. Anything to take the edge off." Elara wanted to touch his hand, to offer comfort, but they'd agreed. No unnecessary physical contact until after the first feeding. Too much risk of confusing natural affection with bond formation. "I'll fast the day before," she said. "Lower blood sugar will reduce the euphoric response." "No." His response was sharp. "You'll eat normally. I need you healthy, strong. If you feel faint or weak, we stop immediately." They finalized the details: time, location, duration, emergency protocols, if something went wrong. By the time they finished, dawn was painting the windows gold. Cassian rose to leave, to retreat to whatever dark corner of the manor he used to escape sunlight. But at the door, he paused. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Even if this is a mistake, even if it costs us both, thank you for seeing me as something worth saving." Then he was gone, leaving Elara alone with their dangerous plan and the 3-day countdown. The nights that followed were the longest of her life. Elara threw herself into preparation, reviewing every medical text on blood loss, wound healing, psychological trauma. She practiced meditation techniques, trying to establish a baseline emotional state she could compare against post-feeding. She wrote letters she might never send, to physicians who might never believe her, documenting her observations of an impossible creature who drank blood and read poetry and grieved his humanity. Cassian avoided her, presumably hunting. She heard him return each morning, his footsteps too quiet to be human. Once, she found a deer carcass at the forest edge, drained and carefully placed where she'd see it proof he was keeping his word, strengthening himself without touching human blood. On the third night, as twilight bled into darkness, she found him waiting in the library. He'd changed into simpler clothes, black shirt, dark trousers, nothing that blood would ruin. His hair was tied back, revealing the sharp architecture of his face. He looked simultaneously exhausted and thrumming with suppressed energy, like a violin string wound too tight. "Are you certain?" he asked without preamble. "Are you?" "No." Brutal honesty. "But I'll do it anyway because you're right. Weakness is its own danger." Alara moved to the chair they'd designated one of the library's wingbacks, positioned near the fire for warmth and light. Her medical bag sat on the nearby table, stocked with bandages, antiseptic, sutures if needed. She'd dressed in an old gown of Margaret's, something she wouldn't mourn if it was ruined. Cassian approached slowly, each step measured. He knelt beside the chair, positioning himself below her eye level, a gesture of submission that made her chest ache. "Your wrist or your throat," he said quietly. "Wrist is safer, easier to control blood flow. Throat is more traditional, but more dangerous. Wrist." She extended her left arm, palm up, exposing the delicate network of veins beneath pale skin. "We're scientists, not romantics." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Spoken like a true physician, he took her hand in both of his, cold fingers cradling her warmth. His thumb traced her pulse point, counting the irregular rhythm. "Last chance to stop this," he murmured. "I know. Last chance for me to be noble." "You're noble enough. Now bite me before I lose my nerve." Cassian's eyes met hers, amber catching firelight, and she saw everything there: hunger, fear, hope, desperation. Then he lowered his head, and she felt the press of his lips against her wrist. A kiss, first, gentle, reverent, apologetic, then the bite. Pain lanced through her arm, sharp and bright. Alara gasped, her free hand gripping the chair's armrest. But beneath the pain came something else, warmth spreading from the wound, honey thick and drowning. Her heart stuttered, then raced, pumping blood toward the breach. She felt his mouth seal over the puncture, felt the pull of suction, felt her life flowing into his death. This is what vampires feel, she thought distantly. This power, this intimacy, this terrible communion. Cassian's grip on her arm tightened. His throat worked as he swallowed. Once, twice, the warmth intensified, becoming heat, becoming something that made her bones feel liquid, and her thoughts scatter like startled birds. "No," she thought. "Stay focused. Observe. Document." She forced herself to catalog sensations. Lightheadedness expected. Euphoria, noted in literature. The strange desire to tilt her head and offer more potential bond formation, monitor closely. Her heart's arrhythmic pattern seemed almost musical now, a syncopated rhythm that matched some internal beat she'd never heard before. After what felt like eternity, and an instant, Cassian pulled back. Blood marked his lips, dark and glistening. His eyes had gone molten, more amber than brown, inhuman and beautiful and terrifying. "Enough," he rasped. "That's enough." But he didn't release her wrist. His thumb pressed against the wound, and she felt heat not from her blood, but from him, from his saliva sealing the puncture, the vampire's healing property, the thing that prevented victims from bleeding out, that made the bite survivable. When he finally pulled his hand away, only 2 neat puncture marks remained, already beginning to close. Alara stared at them, these tiny doorways between life and death, between mortality and something else entirely. "How do you feel?" Cassian's voice was strained. She took inventory. Lightheaded, yes, but not dangerously so. The euphoria was fading, replaced by exhaustion and a strange, satisfied warmth. Like finishing a good meal, or completing difficult work. Or, she caught herself, was that the bond, or natural endorphins? "Monitor closely." "Tired," she said honestly, "but not compromised. My thoughts are clear. I don't feel compelled toward you beyond normal curiosity." Cassian rose abruptly, putting the length of the room between them. His hands shook the first time she'd seen him lose that marble control. "I need to go," he said. "Now. Before what?" He turned, and she saw his face fully for the first time. Color had returned to his cheeks, faint but present. His eyes burned brighter. He looked younger, healthier, more human. He looked hungry. Before I forget that you're a person and remember only that you're food. The words came out like broken glass. Your blood. Elara, I've never tasted anything like it. The way your heart beats, irregular and unique. It's like a signature written in copper and life. I want more. I want to drain you dry and keep you forever in that perfect moment of giving. But you won't. No. He closed his eyes. But not because I'm strong. Because you trusted me, and I'd rather die than betray that trust. Elara stood carefully, testing her balance. Stable enough. She moved to the table where she'd laid out their documentation and began making notes. First feeding complete. Approximately 100 milliliters blood loss. Subject. Thorn. C. Displayed increased coloration, improved vitality, heightened emotional response. Subject. Grant. E. Experienced expected lightheadedness, moderate euphoria, no obvious signs of compulsion or bond formation. Recommend monitoring for 72 hours before second feeding. What are you doing? Cassian's voice came from across the room. Documenting. That's what scientists do. You just donated blood to a vampire, and you're taking notes? Yes. She looked up, meeting his incredulous gaze. Because this matters. Because understanding this could save others in your position, or mine, because knowledge is how we survive things that should kill us. Cassian stared at her for a long moment, then laughed a real laugh. Surprised and warm, and more alive than she'd ever heard from him. You're extraordinary, he said. Terrifying and extraordinary. So are you. She set down her pen. Now go, hunt, rest, whatever you need to do. I'll be here when you're ready to discuss the results. He nodded and turned to leave. But at the door, he paused. Elara, your heartbeat, it's... He struggled for words. It's the most beautiful sound I've ever heard. Flawed and perfect and entirely yours. I'll hear it in my mind until the day I finally turn to dust. Then he was gone, leaving her alone with the fading warmth of the bite and the terrifying knowledge that she'd just crossed a line from which there might be no return. Elara touched the marks on her wrist, feeling the sealed punctures, the evidence of their covenant. And deep in her chest, her irregular heart beat on. Thud, thud. Pause. Thud, thud, thud. Different, as it had always been. But now, for the first time in her life, her difference felt like power rather than weakness. Outside, something howled in the forest, animal or vampire. She couldn't tell. And in the library of Thornwood Manor, Elara Grant smiled and kept taking notes. 3 days after the first feeding, Elara woke to find her world had shifted. Not dramatically, there were no visions, no supernatural compulsions, no sudden overwhelming desire to throw herself at Cassian's feet. But small things had changed. She could feel him in the manor now, a constant presence at the edge of her awareness. When he was in the library, she knew before entering. When he hunted in the forest, she sensed his absence like a missing tooth, and her dreams had changed. She sat at Margaret's writing desk, documenting these observations with clinical precision, while trying to ignore the tremor in her hand. Day 3 post-feeding. Increased awareness of subject's location, within approximately 200-yard radius. No change in autonomy or decision-making capability. Dreams feature subject prominently, but content remains non-erotic and focused on conversation, intellectual exchange. Conclusion. Possible early-stage bond formation, but within acceptable parameters. She didn't write about how those dreams felt, how Cassian's voice in them carried warmth, instead of the careful distance he maintained while awake. How she'd woken reaching for something that wasn't there. A knock at the door interrupted her analysis. Come in, she called, knowing who it would be. Cassian entered carrying a breakfast tray, his movements careful and deliberate. The past 3 days had transformed him visibly, the hollows under his eyes had filled. His skin had warmed from marble white to alabaster. And when he moved, it was with predatory grace, rather than exhausted restraint. He looked healthy, powerful, dangerous. You're avoiding the library, he said without preamble, setting the tray on her desk. Why? Elara met his amber eyes. Because I can feel when you're there, and I wanted to test if distance would weaken the sensation. His jaw tightened. The bond is forming. A connection is forming, she corrected. Bond implies compulsion, loss of agency. I still have both. But yes, I'm aware of you in ways I wasn't before the feeding. She gestured to her notes. I'm documenting everything. So far, It's within expected parameters based on your journals. Cassian moved to the window, staring out at the gray morning. In my journals, subjects were always human, vulnerable to the euphoria, the psychological dependence. You're different. Your analytical mind is fighting the bond's formation. Is that bad? I don't know. He turned to face her. Most vampires would say yes, a partial bond is unstable, difficult to maintain. But I think, he hesitated, I think it might be exactly what we need, connection without possession. Ilara rose and crossed to him, testing her own reactions. Standing this close, she felt warmth, comfort, safety, the sense of rightness that the bond supposedly created, but underneath, her physician's mind remained clear, cataloging his pallor around the edges, the way his hands stayed carefully at his sides. You need to feed again, she observed. 3 days isn't sustainable for your recovery. I can hunt. Animal blood won't rebuild what you've lost over centuries. She held up her wrist, where the faint scars of his bite had faded to silver. This is what we agreed to. Regular, measured feeding. Not starvation punctuated by single drops. Ilara, if we continue this, the bond will strengthen. Eventually, you might not be able to distinguish your own desires from its influence. Then we'll stop before that happens. She took his cold hand in hers, feeling the way his fingers trembled at the contact. But right now, you're strong enough to defend this manor, to defend me. That wasn't true a week ago. Cassian's eyes closed. You're too practical for your own good. I'm a physician. Pragmatism is required. She squeezed his hand once, then released it. Same protocol as before. Library. Tonight. After sunset. Unless you have objections? Countless objections. All of them overruled by the fact that you're right. He opened his eyes, and she saw fear there, carefully controlled. But Ilara, promise me something. What? If you ever feel like the bond is compromising your judgment, if you look at me and see only what I want you to see, rather than what I am, promise you'll tell me. Even if the bond makes you want to hide it. The weight of that request settled over her. He was asking her to betray herself, to save herself, to trust her future judgment over her present choice. I promise, she said quietly. And you promise the same. If you think I'm losing myself, you stop, no matter what I say. Agreed. They stood in the morning light, two people bound by blood and science, and something neither was ready to name. I should go, Cassian said. Sunlight makes me uncomfortable, even in direct exposure. But he didn't move. He stayed there, watching her with ancient eyes that held too many emotions to parse. Thank you, he said finally, for choosing this, for choosing me, even knowing what I am. Then he left before she could respond. Ilara returned to her notes, but her hand shook too much to write clearly. The bond, she told herself. Just the bond's influence, creating false intimacy. Nothing to do with the way her heart had stuttered when he'd said choosing me. Nothing at all. The second feeding went more smoothly. They'd learned from the first Cassian fasted for only 6 hours this time, keeping his hunger controlled. Ilara ate a full meal beforehand, keeping her blood sugar stable. They established a signal. She would tap his shoulder when she felt lightheaded, giving him time to stop before she lost consciousness. When his teeth pierced her wrist, the pain was less shocking, almost familiar. The warmth spread through her like wine, making her thoughts soft and her body pliant. But her physician's mind stayed active, noting, less euphoria this time, tolerance building, good sign. Cassian pulled back exactly at the 2-minute mark, his control absolute. He sealed the wound with his saliva, then immediately crossed to the far side of the library, putting furniture between them. How do you feel? His voice was strained. Stable, clear-headed. She flexed her hand, testing. Your control is improving, because I know what to expect now. Your blood, your heartbeat, I understand their pattern. He wouldn't look at her. It's easier when it's not a complete surprise to my senses. Over the following week, they settled into a routine. Feeding every 3 days, precisely measured, meticulously documented. Between feedings, they worked together in the library, Ilara studying medicine, Cassian teaching her from his centuries of observation. They discussed cases, debated treatments, argued over theories with the passion of scholars who'd finally found intellectual equals. And slowly, inevitably, the bond deepened. Ilara could feel Cassian's emotions now, when they were close, not thoughts, but general states. His contentment when they worked side by side, his hunger as the days between feedings stretched, his carefully controlled desire that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with her. That last part terrified her more than any vampire could, because she felt it too. The way her pulse quickened when he entered a room. The way she found excuses to stand near him, to let their hands brush when passing books. The way she'd begun to crave not just his teaching, but his presence, his voice, the cold comfort of his steadiness. Is this the bond? Or is this me? The question haunted her. On the 14th night after their covenant began, Cassian found her in the library long after midnight, surrounded by his journals on bond formation. Looking for answers? He asked softly. Looking for certainty. She didn't look up. How do I know if what I'm feeling is real, Cassian? How do I know I'm not just a puppet dancing to biological imperatives? He sat across from her, careful to maintain distance. You want the truth? Always. You don't know. You can't know. The bond mimics real affection so perfectly that even I can't tell the difference anymore. His honesty cut like a scalpel. I feel connected to you in ways I haven't felt since Margaret died. But is it genuine? Or is it just your blood in my system, creating false intimacy? I don't have an answer. Alara finally met his eyes. That's terrifying. Yes, but you're still honest about it. You're not pretending, not manipulating me into believing this is something it might not be, because that would be a betrayal worse than any bite. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. Alara, I'm 300 years old. I've seen humans fall in love, watched them build lives together, envied them their certainty, but I've also seen the bond turn people into hollow shells, addicted to the vampire's presence, willing to die for another moment of euphoria. And you think that's what's happening to me? I think we're in dangerous territory. You've maintained your autonomy better than anyone in my journals. But we're also spending hours together every day, feeding regularly, building intimacy that might be half real and half manufactured. He rubbed his face, a gesture of exhaustion. I don't want to be the vampire who stole your future, because you couldn't tell where biology ended and choice began. Alara closed the journal, decision crystallizing. Then we test it. How? We stop. No feeding for 2 weeks. We stay apart, different wings of the manor. Minimal contact. If these feelings are purely bond-driven, they should fade with time and distance. She forced herself to sound clinical, even as her heart protested the plan. If they remain, if I still find myself drawn to you without the reinforcement of regular feeding, then we'll know it's real, Cassian finished. Or at least more real than not. Exactly. He studied her for a long moment, conflict playing across his features. 2 weeks without feeding will weaken me again. Not to previous levels, but enough to be noticeable. I know. But we need to know the truth more than you need to be strong. Spoken like someone who's never been hunted. But he said it gently, without accusation. All right. 2 weeks. Starting tomorrow. We'll communicate through notes if necessary, but no direct interaction. Agreed. Neither of them moved. They sat in the lamplight, on opposite sides of the table, and Alara felt the connection between them like a physical cord. Strong, undeniable, possibly artificial. For what it's worth, Cassian said quietly. I hope it's real. I hope when 2 weeks pass and I see you again, I still feel this. Whatever this is. Because real or not, Alara, you've become the first thing that's made 300 years of isolation seem bearable. He left before she could respond, vanishing into the manor's shadows, and Alara sat alone in the library, touching the healed marks on her wrist, wondering if she'd just made the most rational or the most heartbreaking decision of her life. Outside, clouds covered the moon, and in the darkness, something watched Thornwood Manor with hungry, patient eyes. Vivian had not forgotten, and she was not alone. The first 3 days of separation were merely difficult. Alara kept to the east wing, throwing herself into study. She read every medical text in Margaret's collection, took meticulous notes, practiced suturing techniques on pillows until her fingers cramped. The awareness of Cassian's presence remained a constant hum at the edge of her consciousness, but it didn't overwhelm her thoughts. This is manageable, she wrote in her journal. Distance does not equal suffering. The bond's influence is real but not absolute. By day 5, she began to doubt. The awareness had sharpened into something closer to ache. She found herself standing at windows facing the west wing, where Cassian had retreated. She slept poorly, waking from dreams of conversations they weren't having, reaching for a presence that deliberately stayed away. Withdrawal symptoms, she documented with shaking hand. Psychological craving for subject's proximity, Cannot determine if this indicates bond dependence or natural grief over interrupted companionship. Day 7 broke her pride. Alara found herself outside the library at midnight, knowing Cassian would be there, knowing she'd promised to stay away. Her hand rested on the door handle. One turn, one step, and the ache would ease. She could see him, talk to him, pretend the separation had been enough to prove whatever needed proving. But instead, she wrote a note and slid it under the door. I miss you. I hate that I can't tell if that's real or manufactured. But I miss you. On the other side of the door, Cassian read those words and pressed his forehead to the wood, his cold breath fogging the polish. He wrote back, sliding his response under, I miss you too. 7 more days. We can survive 7 more days. Neither of them mentioned that Cassian looked thinner, that his movements had slowed, that the vitality gained from regular feeding was already fading. Neither mentioned that Alara had lost weight, that circles had appeared under her eyes, that her irregular heartbeat seemed even more erratic without his steadying presence. They were killing themselves for certainty, and neither was willing to stop. Day 9 brought unexpected danger. Alara was in Margaret's room, reading by candlelight, when she felt a wrongness in the manor's atmosphere. Not Cassian's presence, but something else. Multiple someones, circling the property like wolves around a sheepfold. She moved to the window and saw them. Figures in the darkness, too graceful to be human, too many to be coincidence. 6 at least, moving with predatory coordination. Vampires. And they were testing the manor's wards. Alara grabbed the emergency bell. Cassian had installed a pull cord that rang throughout the house. She yanked it 3 times, their signal for danger, then locked herself in the room as instructed. Within seconds, she felt Cassian moving through the manor at inhuman speed. Then his voice, barely controlled, through the door. Stay inside. Don't open this door for anyone but me. Do you understand? What's happening? Vivian brought friends. More than I anticipated. A pause. This is going to be bad, Alara. If I tell you to run, I'm not leaving you. Then pray the wards hold. His footsteps retreated, and Alara pressed her ear to the door, listening to the sounds of confrontation below. Cassian Thorne. Vivian's voice, amplified to Carrie. Come out and face your judgment. You violated covenant law by harboring an unregistered vessel. She's registered, Cassian called back. Aldrich himself approved it. Aldrich is a fool blinded by nostalgia. The Northern Covenant has been overruled by the Grand Council. That girl is too valuable to remain in one vampire's possession. Alara's blood ran cold. The Grand Council, she'd read about them in Cassian's journals. The oldest vampires, the ruling body that governed all others. If they'd taken interest in her irregular heart, she's not a possession, Cassian snarled. She's under House Thorne's protection. House Thorne is dead, Vivian replied. You're just too stubborn to accept it. Stand aside, or we'll remove you and take her anyway. Silence. Then Cassian's voice, cold and ancient, and absolutely terrifying. I am Lord of Thornwood, last of House Thorne, keeper of the Northern Covenant, and you will not pass this threshold while I still exist. Test me if you dare. The attack came suddenly, a concussion of power that made the manor shake. Alara stumbled, gripping the bedpost for balance. Glass shattered somewhere below, wood splintered, and beneath it all, she heard fighting the wet sounds of impact, the hiss of vampires moving faster than human eyes could track. Cassian was outnumbered, 6-1. Cassian was weakened from 2 weeks without proper feeding. Cassian was going to die protecting her. No. Alara grabbed her medical bag and moved to the door. She knew what needed to be done. Knew it violated their separation, their experiment, every carefully constructed boundary they'd established. But knowledge didn't matter if Cassian turned to ash before dawn. She opened the door and ran. The entrance hall was a battlefield. 3 vampires lay unmoving, dead or torpid. She couldn't tell. Cassian stood at the center, blood streaking his face from a cut that wasn't healing, his movements slower than they should be. Vivian circled him with 2 companions, testing his defenses, waiting for the weakness that starvation had created. Alara, no. Cassian's head snapped toward her. Get back. Vivian moved like lightning, suddenly between Cassian and the stairs. The vessel comes to us willingly. How convenient. Don't touch her. Cassian lunged, but he was too slow. One of Vivian's companions intercepted him, slamming him into the wall with bone-cracking force. Alara descended the stairs with her heart hammering its arrhythmic song, loud enough that every vampire in the hall turned toward the sound. I hear it, one breathed. God, I hear it. Like music. Defective. Another whispered. Broken and perfect. Worth a fortune. Vivian finished, her smile vicious. Alara reached the bottom step and stopped, facing them with a physician's calm. I'm not a thing to be bought or sold. I'm under Lord Thorne's protection, registered with the Covenant. And if you touch me, you're declaring war on more than just one manor. Empty threats from a mortal. Vivian started toward her. Are they? Alara pulled a scalpel from her bag with steady hands. Because I've studied vampire physiology extensively over the past month. I know your weaknesses. I know where your hearts sit in your chests. Slightly left of human position. I know silver doesn't kill you, but it burns and scars. I know beheading works, but only if done completely. She pressed the scalpel to her own throat. And I know that if I open my carotid artery right now, in this hall, my unique blood will be wasted on the floor while you fight over the scraps. None of you will profit. None of you will taste the broken music you're all craving. The vampires froze. You're bluffing, Vivian said, but uncertainty flickered in her eyes. I'm a physician, Alara replied calmly. I know exactly how to cut to make it quick, and I'd rather die by my own hand than be sold like livestock. She met Cassian's horrified gaze. I'm sorry, but you taught me that sometimes the best treatment is the one your patient doesn't want. She pressed the blade harder, feeling it bite skin. Blood welled, a single drop that carried her distinctive scent into the air. Every vampire in the hall inhaled sharply. Wait. Vivian held up a hand to her companions. Just wait. Then leave, Alara said. All of you. Report back to your Grand Council that Lord Thorne's vessel is protected by her own will and her own blade. Tell them that forcing this will result in permanent loss of a valuable commodity. They'll send more, Vivian warned. More than 6. More than you can threaten away. Then we'll deal with that when it comes. Alara's hand didn't waver. But tonight, you leave. Now, the standoff stretched, tension crackling like electricity. Then Vivian laughed sharp, bitter, impressed. You're wasted on him, little physician. You should have been a vampire yourself. She gestured to her companions. We leave. But mark my words, Cassian, they will send more. And next time, they'll send someone even you can't fight. They vanished into the night, faster than thought, leaving only destruction and the two of them standing in the wreckage. Alara lowered the scalpel, her hand finally shaking. The small cut on her throat stung, blood trickling down to stain Margaret's dress. Cassian crossed the distance between them in a heartbeat, pulling her into his arms with desperate intensity. He was cold, shaking, wounded, but his grip was absolute. Don't ever do that again, he breathed into her hair. Don't ever risk yourself like that. I can't lose you. Alara pressed her face to his chest, hearing no heartbeat, feeling no warmth, but finding comfort anyway. You're bleeding. I need you safe. That's all I need. But they both knew it was a lie. He needed blood. Human blood. Hers. And their 2-week experiment had just become impossible to complete. Alara pulled back enough to meet his eyes. Feed. Now. Before you collapse. The separation is over. She offered her wrist. We tried. We tested. And what we learned is that I'd rather die than let you face this alone. Maybe that's the bond talking. Maybe it's me. But either way, it's true. Cassian stared at her wrist, at the veins visible beneath skin, at the pulse that beat its irregular song. She saw him struggling hunger versus honor, need versus fear. Please, she whispered. Let me help you heal. He took her wrist with trembling hands, bent his head, and bit. The pain was familiar now, almost welcome. The warmth spread through her like coming home, and as Cassian drank, she felt the bond snap back into place stronger than before, deeper than before, impossible to ignore or deny. She felt his relief, his hunger, his desperate gratitude. Felt the way her blood strengthened him, healed him, brought him back from the edge of destruction. And she felt something else. His fear that this bond, this connection, would consume her entirely. I know, she thought at him, not sure if he could hear. I know this is dangerous, but I choose it anyway. I choose you. Cassian pulled back, the wound already sealing. He looked healthier already, color returning, cuts healing, strength rebuilding. But his expression was anguished. The separation proved nothing, he said hoarsely. Except that we can't survive apart anymore. Maybe that was the answer, Alara replied. Maybe some bonds aren't meant to be broken. Maybe some connections, manufactured or not, become real through choosing them repeatedly. She touched his face, cold and beautiful, and hers in ways that terrified them both. "What do we do now?" she asked. Cassian pulled her close again, his lips brushing her forehead. "We prepare. Because Vivian was right, they'll send more. Someone I can't defeat, even at full strength. Then we find another way. There is no other way. The Grand Council wants you. If not as my vessel, then as someone else's. Your heartbeat, your blood, you're too valuable to them." Alara's mind raced, cataloging options, considering alternatives. Then, inspiration struck terrible, impossible, perfect. "There's one way," she said slowly. "One way they couldn't claim me." Cassian went very still. "No, if I became vampire myself." "Absolutely not. Then I'd have autonomy under Covenant law. They couldn't take me, couldn't sell me, couldn't." "Alara, no." He gripped her shoulders. "I told you before, immortality isn't a gift. It's a sentence. I wouldn't condemn you to this existence, even if it was my choice, especially if it was your choice, because that choice might be influenced by the bond, and I'd never know if you truly wanted it, or if my bite made you think you wanted it." His voice broke. "I've been alone for 300 years. I won't create a companion who might one day wake up and realize she never wanted to be here." Alara opened her mouth to argue, but he pressed a finger gently to her lips. "There has to be another way," he said. "We'll find it, together. But turning you is off the table. That's not negotiable." She wanted to argue, wanted to point out the logic, the practicality, the solution right in front of them. But she saw the absolute terror in his eyes and understood. This was his line, the one thing he couldn't compromise, even to save them both. "All right," she said softly. "We'll find another way. Promise me." "I promise I won't ask you to turn me." The careful wording wasn't lost on him. His eyes narrowed. "Alara, that's the promise I can make," she said firmly. "The rest, we'll figure out together." They stood in the wreckage of the entrance hall, holding each other while the first hints of dawn painted the windows gray. Outside, unknown enemies gathered. Inside, two people bound by blood and choice faced impossible odds, but at least they faced them together, and neither was willing to surrender the other to darkness. Not yet, not ever. The attack had changed everything. Over the next 3 days, Cassian fortified Thornwood like a castle preparing for siege. He strengthened the wards, laid traps around the grounds, and contacted every ally he still had vampires who remembered when House Thorn had been powerful, who owed him favors or simply respected his stubborn honor. The responses were not encouraging. "Most won't come," he told Alara on the third evening, his jaw tight with frustration. "The Grand Council's reach is too long. They're afraid of being labeled accomplices." They sat in the library, papers spread between them, maps, Covenant law, desperate strategies. Alara had barely left his side since the attack, the separation experiment abandoned in favor of survival. The bond hummed between them constantly now, no longer something to be tested but accepted as fact. "What about Aldrich?" she asked. "He seemed fair." "Aldrich answers to the council. He'll enforce their ruling, even if he disagrees with it personally." Cassian rubbed his face, exhaustion showing despite regular feeding. "We're running out of time and options." Alara studied the Covenant law document for the 100th time, searching for loopholes they'd missed. Her eyes kept returning to one section. Autonomous vampires retain all rights and protections under Covenant law, including the right to refuse claims of ownership or vassalage. "What if there was a way to make me autonomous without turning me?" she said slowly. Cassian looked up. "What do you mean?" "The bond. It's one way right now, I feel you, but the connection is unequal. What if it was mutual? What if I had the same kind of awareness of you that you have of me? That's not possible without..." He stopped. "Without a blood exchange." "Exactly." Alara leaned forward, ideas crystallizing. "Your journals mentioned it. When a vampire and human exchange blood repeatedly, both feeding from each other, it creates a balanced bond. True partnership, rather than thrall and master. No one's attempted that in centuries. It's considered too dangerous, too close to creating a dhampir." "What's a dhampir?" Cassian's expression darkened. "A human who's consumed enough vampire blood to gain some of their abilities, enhanced strength, limited healing, extended lifespan without completing the transition to full vampire. They're rare, unstable, and usually die young." He shook his head. "It's not a solution, Alara. It's another gamble. But if it worked? If I became something between human and vampire, would the Grand Council still consider me a vessel worth claiming? They'd consider you an abomination. But his voice held a note of consideration. Which means they might leave you alone entirely, as not worth the political mess of categorizing you. Alara pulled out his experimental journals, flipping to the sections on blood exchange. You documented 3 cases of attempted mutual bonding. 2 failed. Subjects died from the vampire's venom, but the 3rd survived for 18 years with Dampier abilities before choosing to complete the transformation. Cassian's voice was hollow. I was that vampire. She was my first true companion after Margaret died, and I watched her slowly lose her humanity, watched the vampire blood poison her bit by bit, until she begged me to finish what we'd started. The confession hung heavy between them. Did you? Alara asked softly. Yes. And she lived another 200 years as a vampire, before walking into the sun. He met her eyes. She told me, at the end, that the Dampier years were torture too human to fit with vampires, too changed to fit with humans, trapped in between with a hunger that grew worse every year. Is that what you want? I want to survive. I want to choose my own fate, rather than waiting for the council to choose it for me. Alara placed her hand over his. And I want you to stop carrying guilt for every person you've tried to save. She made her choice, Cassian. Just like I'm making mine. Your choice might be influenced by the bond. Or my choice created the bond in the first place. We're going in circles. She squeezed his hand. What if you feed from me one more time? And I feed from you. Just once. We test how my body reacts to your blood, before committing to repeated exchanges. And if you have an adverse reaction, if the venom kills you, then at least I died trying rather than waiting to be taken. She softened her voice. I trust you, Cassian. Do you trust me to know my own mind? He closed his eyes, the eternal battle between honor and pragmatism playing across his features. When he opened them again, she saw resignation mixed with fear. One exchange, he said. Tonight. I feed first, then give you a small amount of my blood, no more than you'd drink in a sip of wine. We monitor your reaction for 72 hours before deciding whether to continue. Agreed. And if you show any signs of systemic poisoning, fever, convulsions, delirium, I stop immediately. No argument. Agreed. They sat in silence, the weight of their decision settling like snow. Alara felt the bond thrumming between them, Cassian's fear and determination mixing with her own nervous resolve. You know what's strange? She said finally. A month ago, I was running for my life, from people who called me a witch. Now I'm volunteering to become something that makes witches look ordinary. Cassian's lips twitched. You have a gift for understatement. It's a medical necessity, keeps the patients calm. Is that what I am? Your patient? Among other things. She stood, offering her hand. Come on, Dr. Thorne. Let's make medical history together. He took her hand, and they walked together to the library's center, where candlelight painted the floor in gold. Cassian prepared carefully, a clean knife, fresh bandages, his journals open to the Dampier section for reference. Last chance to back out, he said. I know. Last chance for me to be noble. You're plenty noble. Now bite me before I lose my nerve. This time, when his teeth pierced her wrist. Alara didn't close her eyes. She watched his face, as he drank, the way tension eased from his shoulders, the way color bloomed in his cheeks, the way he looked younger and older simultaneously. Beautiful and terrible in hers. After precisely 2 minutes, he pulled back. Then, without hesitation, he picked up the knife and drew it across his own palm. Dark blood welled thicker than human blood, almost black in the candlelight. Drink slowly, he instructed. Just a few drops. Stop immediately if you taste anything wrong, bitterness, burning, anything that feels poisonous. Alara bent her head to his palm. The blood touched her tongue, and she expected horror, revulsion, the natural human reaction to consuming death. Instead, she tasted power. It was cold going down, like swallowing winter. But beneath the cold came warmth, spreading from her stomach outward in waves. Her heart stuttered, not its normal arrhythmic pattern, but something sharper, more pronounced. Thud, thud, T-H-U-D, pause. Thud, T-H-U-D, thud. Cassian pulled his hand back. That's enough. How do you feel? Alara took inventory. The room looked sharper, colors more vivid. She could hear things. She shouldn't be able to hear Cassian's non-existent heartbeat as a whisper of absence. Mice in the walls, wind through trees hundreds of yards away. Her skin felt electric, hyper-aware of every sensation. I feel, she struggled for words, alive. More alive than I've ever felt. That's the blood taking effect. It will peak over the next hour, then fade. If you're going to have a negative reaction, it will happen during the peak. He guided her to a chair. Sit. Don't move. Let me monitor your vital signs. The next hour was the longest of Alara's life. She felt her body changing, adapting, fighting to process the foreign substance in her bloodstream. Her temperature spiked, then plummeted. Her heartbeat raced, then slowed to something almost normal. Pain lanced through her muscles like growing pains, magnified 1,000-fold. Cassian stayed beside her throughout, his hands cool on her forehead, his voice steady in her ear. Breathe. Just breathe. You're doing well. Your body is adjusting, not rejecting. Just breathe. When the peak finally passed, Alara slumped in the chair, exhausted but alive. The enhanced senses had faded somewhat, but not entirely. She could still hear things she shouldn't, see details human eyes couldn't process. Did it work? She whispered. Cassian examined her pupils, her pulse, the way her breath had changed. His expression was awed and terrified. Yes, he said. Your body accepted the blood. You're alive, conscious, and showing preliminary signs of Dhampir physiology. He met her eyes. Congratulations, Dr. Grant. You're officially not entirely human anymore. Alara laughed, exhausted, relieved, slightly hysterical. What have we done? Something dangerous and possibly brilliant. He helped her stand, his arm supporting her weight. But we won't know the full effects for days. You need rest. We'll continue observations tomorrow. He carried her to Margaret's room. She was too weak to protest and laid her carefully on the bed. As he turned to go, her hand shot out, grabbing his wrist with strength that surprised them both. Stay, she said. Please. I don't want to be alone tonight. Cassian hesitated, conflict clear on his face. But then he nodded and settled into the chair beside her bed, their hands linked across the blanket. I'm here, he murmured. I'll watch over you. Sleep. Alara's eyes closed, exhaustion pulling her under. But before sleep claimed her, she felt it. The bond had changed. It was no longer one-way awareness, but something mutual. She could feel Cassian's emotions now, his fierce protectiveness, his terror that he'd just poisoned her, his desperate hope that this gamble would work. And beneath it all, something else. Something neither of them had dared name but could no longer ignore. Love. Or at least, something that looked enough like love that the difference didn't matter. The next morning, Alara woke to find herself changed. Not dramatically, she was still human, still mortal, still herself. But small things had shifted. Her reflection in the mirror looked sharper, her eyes brighter. When she moved, it was with grace she'd never possessed. Her irregular heartbeat still stuttered, but now it felt less like weakness and more like a unique rhythm only she could play. The test came at noon, when she accidentally cut her finger while opening a letter. The wound sealed itself within seconds, skin knitting together with barely a scar. Vampire blood, Cassian said, examining her healed finger with scientific detachment that fooled neither of them. It's enhancing your natural healing. If we continue the exchange, the effect will strengthen. Will it cure my heart? She asked. No. The arrhythmia is structural, built into your anatomy. Vampire blood heals damage, but it doesn't rewrite fundamental architecture. He smiled slightly. Your heartbeat will always be different. Always be yours. Somehow, that felt right. They spent the day documenting changes. Alara's increased strength. She could lift books that would have required 2 hands before. Her enhanced senses. She could read by moonlight now. Her altered sleep patterns. She needed less rest, woke more alert. By evening, when Cassian suggested a second exchange, Alara agreed without hesitation. This time, the process was easier. Her body knew what to expect. The pain was less, the adaptation faster. And when Cassian cut his palm again, when she drank his cold blood, she felt the bond between them solidify into something permanent. I know you, she thought at him. I know your fear and your loneliness, and the way you've loved humanity from the outside for 300 years. I know you. And I know you, came his mental response, clear as words. Your brilliant mind and your stubborn courage and the way you've never let your broken heart define you. I know you, Alara Grant, and I choose you. The bond sang between them, no longer something to fear but something to celebrate, a partnership forged in blood and choice, and the desperate hope that love could exist even in impossible circumstances. They stood in the library, holding each other, while candlelight painted shadows that no longer felt threatening. "What happens now?" Alara asked. "Now we prepare for what comes next. The council will send their enforcers soon. They always do when lesser vampires fail." Cassian's jaw set. "But you're not defenseless anymore. You're not human, not vampire, but something in between. Something they can't easily categorize or claim. Will it be enough?" "I don't know, but we'll face it together." Alara tilted her head back, meeting his ancient eyes. "I should be terrified. Why aren't you?" "Because I'm finally becoming who I was always meant to be. Not despite my differences, but because of them." She smiled. "And because I'm not alone anymore." Cassian bent his head and kissed her the first real kiss, the one they'd both been avoiding since the bond began. It was cold and warm simultaneously, tasting of blood and trust, and the terrifying beauty of choosing each other despite every logical reason not to. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, or at least, she was, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered. "Bond or no bond, manufactured or real. I love you. And if that damns us both, so be it. Then we're damned together," Alara replied. "But Cassian? I love you too, and I'm not sorry for it." Outside, storm clouds gathered. Inside, two people who'd been alone too long stood together against the darkness, and neither was willing to surrender to the night. Not yet, not ever. He came on the 7th night after Alara's transformation began. She sensed him first, a wrongness in the air, a pressure that made her newly enhanced senses scream warning. Cassian felt it too. She knew because the bond between them thrummed with shared alarm. "He's here," Cassian said quietly. They stood in the entrance hall, prepared as much as they could be. "The council's enforcer. His name is Constantine, and he's older than any vampire I've ever met. 2,000 years, perhaps more. Can you fight him?" "No." The admission was stark. "But I can buy you time to run." "I'm not running." "Alara." The front door exploded inward. Not opened, not unlocked, exploded. The wood splintering into 1,000 pieces that hung suspended in the air for one impossible moment before clattering to the floor. Through the wreckage stepped a figure that made every vampire she'd seen look like children playing dress-up. Constantine was tall, skeletal thin, with skin like aged parchment stretched over ancient bones. His eyes were not amber but silver, glowing with cold fire. He wore clothes from an era she couldn't name, embroidered robes that whispered of Byzantine emperors and forgotten kingdoms. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, making the air itself difficult to breathe. "Cassian Thorne," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that hurt to hear. "You have something that belongs to the council. She belongs to herself." Cassian stepped in front of Alara, his body a shield. "And she's under House Thorne's protection." "House Thorne." Constantine smiled, revealing fangs like ivory daggers. "I remember when House Thorne was powerful. When your grandfather ruled 3 counties and commanded 50 vampire vassals. You are the last ember of a dying fire, boy. Do not waste my time with territorial claims." He moved, and suddenly, he was inches from Cassian, one skeletal hand wrapped around his throat. Cassian struggled, but it was like watching a child fight an avalanche. "The girl comes with me," Constantine continued. "The council has use for her unique blood. She will be well-treated, well-fed, kept in comfort while we study." "No." The word came from Alara, and it carried power she didn't know she possessed. The bond between her and Cassian flared bright, and she felt his strength flowing into her, mixing with the vampire blood she'd consumed, creating something neither had anticipated. Constantine turned those silver eyes on her. "You refuse the council's generosity?" "I refuse to be property." Alara stepped forward, her heart hammering its irregular song loud enough now that she knew he could hear it. "I'm Dhampir, not human, not entirely. That places me in legal gray area under covenant law." "Dhampir." Constantine released Cassian, who crumpled to his knees, gasping. "Interesting. I haven't encountered one in 3 centuries. They usually die during the transformation process." He circled her slowly. "But you're not fully transformed, are you? Still mostly human, still vulnerable, still." He moved like lightning, his hand suddenly at her throat. "Still mortal enough to break." Pain exploded through Alara's body as Constantine's grip tightened. She felt her windpipe compress, felt consciousness beginning to dim. But she also felt something else, Cassian's rage through the bond, pure and absolute, combined with her own desperate will to survive. The vampire blood in her system responded. Her hand shot up, gripping Constantine's wrist with strength that surprised them both. Not enough to break his hold, but enough to make him pause. Enough to make him notice. "I'm also strong enough to fight," she gasped. "And connected enough to Cassian that killing me might break something in him you don't want broken. Do you know what happens when a bonded vampire loses their partner?" Constantine's eyes narrowed. "They go feral, mindless, dangerous. And Cassian has 300 years of repressed emotion, 300 years of isolation, 300 years of controlled rage waiting to be unleashed." She forced herself to meet those silver eyes. "Kill me, and you won't get a compliant vessel for the council. You'll get a monster who'll hunt every council member until someone puts him down. Is my blood worth that political nightmare?" Silence stretched between them. Constantine's grip didn't loosen, but it didn't tighten either. "You're bluffing," he said finally. "Test me." Behind them, Cassian had risen to his feet. Blood dripped from his mouth where Constantine's grip had torn skin, but his amber eyes burned with something beyond rage, something primal and terrible. "Let her go, Constantine," he said, his voice barely human. "Last warning. Or what? You'll fight me?" Constantine laughed. "You're 300 years old, boy. I've destroyed civilizations older than you. Maybe. But I have nothing left to lose." Cassian's form seemed to blur, muscles tensing, preparing for a fight he couldn't win. And a vampire with nothing to lose is the most dangerous thing in existence. The tableau held ancient enforcer, desperate lord, and the woman caught between them. Ilara felt the bond screaming through her blood, felt Cassian's willingness to die for her, felt her own transformation in progress responding to the threat. Then a new voice cut through the tension. "Enough." They all turned. Aldrich stood in the shattered doorway, flanked by 4 other vampires Ilara didn't recognize. The regional arbiter looked older than she remembered, wearier, but his authority was absolute. "Stand down, Constantine," Aldrich commanded. "This situation is more complex than the council was informed." The council's orders were based on incomplete information. The girl is not a simple human vessel. She's undergone blood exchange with Lord Thorn, begun Dhampir transformation with both participants' informed consent, and established a mutual bond recognized under subsection 7 of the Covenant laws. Aldrich's voice was steel. "She is not unclaimed property. She is a registered partner in an experimental medical procedure, documented and witnessed." Constantine's hand finally loosened on Ilara's throat. She stumbled back into Cassian's arms, coughing. "The council won't accept," Constantine began. "The council will accept what I tell them to accept." Aldrich moved into the hall, his presence commanding despite Constantine's greater age. "Because I am the arbiter for this region, and I say this case falls under research exemption. Lord Thorn has been documenting every step of this process. The medical knowledge gained could benefit all vampire kind. That places it under protection. Since when do you care about medical research?" Constantine's tone was suspicious. "Since I read Lord Thorn's journals and realized he might have found a solution to one of our oldest problems, how to create true partnerships with humans without enslaving them." Aldrich gestured to Ilara and Cassian. "Look at them. Bonded, yes, but mutually. She has as much power in this relationship as he does. When was the last time any vampire achieved that?" The question hung in the air. Constantine studied them for a long moment, his ancient eyes calculating. Finally, he stepped back. "The council will want proof, documentation, regular reports on the transformation's progress." "They'll have it," Aldrich agreed. "Lord Thorn is nothing if not thorough. And if the girl dies during transformation, if this experiment fails, then we'll have learned what doesn't work. Science requires risk." Aldrich's expression hardened. "But she won't be dying tonight, Constantine, and she won't be taken from Thornwood. Are we clear?" The ancient vampire's smile was cold, crystal. "But know this. Arbiter, the council's patience is not infinite. If this experiment proves worthless, if the girl becomes nothing more than Thorn's glorified blood bag, they will come for her again, and next time, I won't be alone." He vanished like smoke, leaving only the echo of power and threat. The other vampires dispersed. Aldrich remained, surveying the destroyed entrance hall with a weary sigh. "You've made powerful enemies, Cassian," he said quietly. "I know. Thank you for intervening." "Don't thank me yet. Constantine was right. The council's patience is limited. You need to make this transformation work. Need to prove that Dhampir partnership is viable. Otherwise," he trailed off. "The implication's clear. Otherwise, they'll claim me as a failed experiment." Ilara finished. "Medical waste to be disposed of or studied." "Precisely." Aldrich turned to her, his expression softening. But I don't think you'll fail, Miss Grant. You're too stubborn, too brilliant, and you've chosen one of the most honorable vampires I've ever known. He glanced at Cassian. Don't make me regret standing up for you, old friend. I won't. After Aldrich left, Cassian and Alara stood in the wreckage of their temporary victory. The entrance hall was destroyed, the door splintered, blood staining the marble. But they were alive, together, still fighting. That was insane, Cassian said finally, threatening him with my potential feral state. You had no way of knowing I'd actually go feral, didn't I? Alara touched his face, feeling his jaw tight with residual rage. I felt it through the bond. The way you were ready to burn the world if he hurt me. That wasn't bluff, Cassian. That was truth. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. I was ready to die tonight. To take him with me if possible. To buy you even a few seconds to escape. I know. I felt that too. She smiled sadly. We're both terrible at self-preservation. Or we finally found something worth dying for. They held each other in the ruins, while moonlight painted the floor silver, and the bond between them hummed with relief and love, and the knowledge that they'd bought themselves time but not safety. We need to finish this, Cassian said. Complete your transformation fully. Make you strong enough that even the council will think twice before claiming you. How long will it take? Months, maybe a year. Repeated blood exchanges, careful monitoring, pushing your system to adapt without breaking. His arms tightened around her. It will be painful, dangerous. You might not survive, but if I do survive, I'll be something new. Something that proves vampires and humans can coexist as equals. Alara pulled back to meet his eyes. Worth the risk. You're certain? I've never been more certain of anything. Cassian kissed her, then fierce and desperate, and tender all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, her, or pretending to breathe him, he rested his forehead against hers. Then let's make history, Dr. Grant. Let's prove that love can transform even death into something beautiful, poetic, she teased. I've had 300 years to practice. They laughed, exhausted and terrified, and more alive than either had felt in decades. Outside, dawn was coming. Cassian would need to retreat soon. But for this moment, they had each other, and that would have to be enough. 6 months passed in a rhythm of transformation and study. Every 3 days, they performed the exchange, Cassian feeding from Alara, then offering his blood in return. Each time, her body adapted more easily. Each time, the changes became more pronounced. By month 2, Alara could see perfectly in darkness. Her hearing grew so acute she could track conversations 3 rooms away. Her strength increased until she could move furniture that once required help. The irregular heartbeat remained, but now it beat stronger, more resilient. By month 4, she stopped aging entirely. The fine lines beginning at the corners of her eyes smoothed away. Her body maintained perfect health without effort. She needed less sleep, less food, less of everything that made humans vulnerable. You're becoming ageless, Cassian observed one evening, comparing recent sketches to ones from weeks prior. Not immortal, you can still be killed, but time has lost its claim on you. Is that the vampire blood, or the bond? Both. They're inseparable now. He set down the sketches. How do you feel? Physically? Emotionally? Alara considered. Powerful, clear-headed, still myself, but more. Like I've been living my whole life with weights on my ankles and someone finally removed them. She met his eyes. And I don't crave your blood anymore. I don't need the exchange for survival. I want it because it strengthens me, because it deepens our connection. But I could stop if I needed to. That's what true Dhampir status means, Cassian said quietly. The transformation is complete. You're no longer human, no longer transitioning. You're something entirely new. They documented everything, every physical change, every enhanced ability, every psychological shift. Cassian's journals now contained the most comprehensive record of Dhampir transformation in existence, knowledge that could change how vampires and humans interacted forever, if the council allowed it to exist. Monthly, they submitted reports to Aldrich, who forwarded them to the Grand Council with his own annotations. The council's response was silence, not approval, but not condemnation either, a holding pattern while they decided whether Alara was an abomination or an innovation. Meanwhile, life at Thornwood found its rhythm. Alara continued her medical studies, but now with the advantage of enhanced perception and Cassian's centuries of observation. She performed dissections with supernatural precision, understood anatomy at a level impossible for purely human physicians. She began writing papers anonymously. For now, that pushed medical science forward by decades. Cassian emerged from his isolation. He traveled to nearby cities during night hours, re-establishing connections with vampire society, letting it be known that House Thorn had found new strength, that Thornwood was no longer the manor of a dying bloodline but the home of something unprecedented. Some vampires were curious, others hostile, but none dared attack after Constantine's failed claim. And through it all, the bond between Alara and Cassian deepened into something that transcended the blood that had created it. They were partners in research, in survival, in the quiet intimacy of shared existence. She learned his patterns, his ancient hurts, the way 300 years of loneliness had shaped him. He learned her brilliance, her stubborn courage, the way she saw possibilities where others saw only limitations. They loved each other, simply and completely, in ways that made the question of whether the bond had created or merely revealed that love utterly irrelevant. On the 6-month anniversary of her first transformation exchange, Alara stood before the mirror in Margaret's room, no longer Margaret's, now hers entirely, and studied her reflection. She looked 25, though she was 27. Would still look 25 when she was 50, 70, perhaps 200. Her eyes had taken on a faint amber tint, barely noticeable, except in certain light. Her canines were slightly elongated, not enough to be obvious, but enough to mark her as other. She was Dhampir, fully and completely, neither human nor vampire, but something that bridged both worlds. A knock at the door pulled her from reflection. "Come in," she called. Cassian entered, dressed for travel. Aldrich sent word. "The council wants to meet you, formally, to assess whether your transformation warrants continued protection or elimination." Alara's stomach tightened. "When?" 3 days. "In the council's seat, a city called Nocturne, that exists outside mortal maps." He moved to her side. "I'll be with you the entire time. You're not facing them alone. Will it be dangerous?" "Yes. But you're strong now. Fast. You can defend yourself if needed." His hand found hers. "And I won't let them take you. Whatever happens, we're leaving that city together." Alara squeezed his fingers, drawing strength from the bond. 3 days. That gives us time to prepare. And time for one more exchange, Cassian added, to make sure you're at full strength when we arrive. That night, they performed the ritual that had become sacred to them both. But this time, after Cassian fed, and after Alara drank his blood in return, he pulled her close and kissed her deep and desperate, and filled with everything words couldn't express. "Whatever they decide," he murmured against her lips, "you've already won. You've proven that transformation doesn't have to mean enslavement. That partnership can exist between our kinds. Nothing they say can take that away. Unless they kill us both, then we die knowing we were right." He smiled, fierce and beautiful. "I've lived 300 years, Alara, and the past 6 months with you have been worth more than all those centuries combined. If this is where it ends, I have no regrets." "Liar," she said fondly. "You have at least 3 regrets. I've counted." "Fine, 3 regrets, and none of them involve you." They held each other while the moon traced its arc across the sky, 2 people preparing to face judgment for the crime of choosing each other. And if fear touched them, it was overwhelmed by the certainty that some loves were worth dying for, some bonds were worth defending, and some transformations were worth every risk required to complete them. 3 days later, they left for Nocturne together, and neither looked back at Thornwood Manor, beautiful and solitary in the darkness, waiting for the masters who might never return. Nocturne existed in the spaces between. Alara felt it as Cassian guided their carriage through fog that shouldn't exist, down roads that disappeared behind them, toward a city that mortal eyes could never see. Her Dhampir senses screamed that reality was bending, that they'd crossed from the world she knew into something older and stranger. "The council built Nocturne 5,000 years ago," Cassian explained, his hand tight on hers. "Before Rome, before Egypt, when vampires still ruled openly. It exists in twilight, never fully night, never fully day. Time moves differently here." The fog parted, revealing a city of impossible architecture. Buildings that seemed carved from shadow and moonlight rose in elegant spirals, streets paved with material that glowed faintly silver wound between structures that defied physics. And everywhere, vampires, hundreds of them, moving through the city with the casual arrogance of apex predators. Alara's heart stuttered its irregular rhythm, and she felt every vampire within hearing distance turn toward the sound. "Stay close," Cassian murmured. And don't show fear. They can smell it. They were met at the city's center by Aldrich, who looked even more exhausted than before. The council is waiting. They've been discussing your case for 3 days now. Opinion is divided. Divided how? Alara asked. Half see you as an abomination that violates natural law. Half see you as an opportunity to study Dhampir transformation. Aldrich's expression was grim. The tiebreaker is Constantine. If he rules for elimination, that's what the council will order. The enforcer decides our fate? Cassian's voice was dangerously quiet. He's the oldest, the strongest. What he says carries weight the others can't ignore. Aldrich gestured toward a building that looked like a cathedral carved from obsidian. This way. And Cassian? Try not to antagonize them. No promises. They entered the council chamber, a vast circular room with 12 thrones arranged in a semicircle. 11 were occupied by vampires so ancient they barely looked human anymore. The 12th, the largest, held Constantine, his silver eyes fixed on Alara with unreadable intensity. Alara Grant, one of the council spoke, her voice like wind through dead leaves. You stand before the Grand Council accused of illegal transformation without full vampire status. How do you plead? Not guilty, Alara said clearly. My transformation was consensual, documented, and conducted under the supervision of a licensed arbiter. I broke no laws. You exist in violation of natural order, another council member hissed. Dhampirs are unstable, dangerous. They inevitably turn feral or die. You should have been stopped. Yet, I'm neither feral nor dead. Alara stepped forward, Cassian a silent shadow at her side. I'm functional, sane, and capable of contributing to vampire society. My existence proves Dhampir transformation can be successful with proper protocols. Your existence proves nothing except one anomaly. The first speaker again. What happens when others attempt to replicate this? When humans demand transformation, claiming your case as precedent, then they're educated on the risks and allowed to make informed choices, just as I was. Alara's voice carried through the chamber. You claim to be a council, a governing body, but you rule through fear and control rather than consent. I'm offering you a better path partnership with humans rather than predation. Murmurs rippled through the assembled vampires. Some angry, some thoughtful, all focused entirely on her. Bold words from a half-breed, one sneered. Accurate words from someone who sees both sides, Alara countered. I was human. Now I'm Dhampir. I understand both perspectives in ways pure vampires never can. That makes me valuable, not dangerous. Unless you use that understanding against us. Constantine spoke for the first time, his voice cutting through the debate. You could teach humans how to fight us, how to exploit our weaknesses. You're a security risk. I could, but I won't. Alara met those ancient silver eyes. Because I've chosen Cassian. Chosen partnership. Chosen to help both our peoples coexist, rather than destroy each other. Chosen? Constantine rose from his throne, descending toward her with predatory grace. Or been compelled through blood bond to believe you've chosen? The question struck at the heart of everything. Alara felt Cassian tense beside her, felt his readiness to defend her. But she placed a hand on his arm, a gentle pressure that said, I'll handle this. The bond is real, she said calmly. It connects me to Cassian in ways that make distinguishing manufactured emotion from genuine feeling impossible. But here's what I know with absolute certainty. I chose him before the bond existed. I chose to offer my blood when he was starving. I chose to drink his blood when transformation was dangerous. Every major decision in this process, I made consciously, with full knowledge of consequences. She stepped closer to Constantine, unafraid despite his power. The bond didn't create my choice, it was born from it. And if you can't understand the difference, then you've been alone so long you've forgotten what genuine connection feels like. Silence crashed through the chamber. Constantine stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, impossibly, he smiled a real smile. Not the cruel mockery he'd shown at Thornwood. You're either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish, he said. I haven't been spoken to that way in 1,000 years. Probably both, Alara admitted. But I'm also right. Yes. Constantine turned to address the council. You are. The bond is mutual, consensual, and maintained by choice on both sides. I've seen enough thrall bonds to recognize the difference. This is partnership, not possession. He resumed his throne, his judgment clear. The Grand Council recognizes Alara Grant as successful Dhampir transformation. She is granted autonomous status under covenant law, with all rights and protections thereof. Any vampire who harms her will answer to this council directly. The other council members shifted, some clearly unhappy, but none willing to contradict Constantine's verdict. Furthermore, he continued, Lord Cassian Thorne is commended for his meticulous documentation of the transformation process. His research will be preserved in council archives and made available to any vampire seeking to establish similar partnerships. Aldrich exhaled audibly, relief written across his features. This hearing is concluded, Constantine declared. Elara Grant and Cassian Thorne are free to return to Thornwood Manor with the council's protection. Case closed. The dismissal was absolute. As they left the chamber, Elara's legs nearly gave out. Cassian caught her, his arm strong around her waist. You did it, he breathed. You convinced them. We did it, she corrected. Your research, my transformation, our partnership, all of it together. Outside the cathedral, Aldrich waited. That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever witnessed, lecturing Constantine on loneliness. It worked, didn't it? Elara smiled weakly. Because it was true. Aldrich's expression softened. Go home. Rest. You've earned it. And Cassian? Take care of her. She's worth more than you know. I know, Cassian said simply. The journey back to Thornwood felt like waking from a dream. As the carriage emerged from fog into familiar forest, as the manor appeared in the distance, beautiful and solitary, and theirs, Elara felt tension drain from her body. They were safe. They were recognized. They were free. Inside Thornwood, Cassian swept her into his arms, kissing her with relief and joy and love that transcended every boundary between them. Thank you, he murmured against her lips. For being brave enough to choose this, to choose us. Thank you for being worth choosing, she replied. That night, they stood together on Thornwood's balcony, watching stars wheel overhead. Elara's irregular heartbeat thrummed steadily, no longer a weakness, but a symbol of her unique existence. Cassian's arm circled her waist, cold and strong and infinitely comforting. What now? She asked. Now we live. He smiled, genuine and warm. We continue your medical research. We document more about Dhampir physiology. We help other vampires who want partnerships instead of thrall bonds. We build something new. Together. Always together. They stood in the darkness, neither human nor vampire, but something that bridged both worlds. And they were content. Because some transformations were worth every risk. Some loves transcended biology and magic. And some heartbeats, irregular and unique, were beautiful precisely because they were different. 1 year later, the medical journal sat on Elara's desk, leather-bound and precise, waiting to be sent to physicians across Europe. Inside, detailed anatomical studies, revolutionary surgical techniques, observations about disease and healing that would change medicine forever. All signed under the pseudonym E. Thornwood, M.D. Let them wonder. Let them debate. The knowledge was what mattered. Elara closed the journal and moved to the window, watching dawn paint the eastern sky gold and rose. She could tolerate sunlight now, one of the advantages of Dhampir status. Not comfortably, but enough to see morning's beauty. Behind her, in the shadows where sunlight couldn't reach, Cassian sat reading. 300 years of solitary existence. And now he had company, conversation, partnership, love. He looked up, feeling her gaze through the bond. What are you thinking? That I was running for my life a year ago. That I thought I was dying when I found Thornwood. She smiled. Funny how wrong I was. You were dying, Cassian said. We both were, just not physically. He rose and crossed to her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind, careful to stay in shadow. They stood together, watching light chase darkness across the grounds. No regrets? He asked quietly. Elara thought of the village that had tried to burn her, of the human life she'd left behind, of mortality she'd traded for something stranger and more beautiful. She thought of her irregular heartbeat, still arrhythmic, still unique, still hers, and how it had led her to this impossible love. Only one, she said. What's that? That I didn't find you sooner. Cassian laughed, the sound rich and warm and alive despite his undead nature. He turned her to face him, cupping her face in his cold hands. We have time now, he murmured. Decades, centuries, who knows how long. We'll fill them with research and love, and proving that different doesn't mean impossible. Promise? On my heart, or the memory of it. He kissed her, gentle and sure. I promise, Dr. Alara Thornwood, your heartbeat is different, and it's the most beautiful sound I've ever heard. Outside, the sun rose fully, painting Thornwood Manor in gold. Inside, two people who'd been alone too long stood together in the space between darkness and light, neither fully one nor the other, but something new entirely. And Alara's heart beat on a rhythmic, imperfect, utterly her own. Thud-thud. Pause. Thud-thud-thud. Different. Beautiful. Eternal.